A little girl burst through the door of a roadside diner on a freezing Tennessee afternoon. No coat, no shoes, eyes wild with the kind of terror that doesn't belong on a child's face. She didn't slow down. She didn't look at the waitress or the truckers or the couple near the window. She ran straight to the only person in that diner who looked like danger. A scarred, silent biker sitting alone with black coffee and a past he never talked about. And she wrapped both arms around his leather-clad leg and whispered words that stopped every conversation in the room cold. "Please don't let go." He looked down at her, then looked up, through the glass, at the man standing outside in the snow, watching. Something in Rhett Maddox that had been dead for years opened its eyes. If you want to know what happened next, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's ride. The diner was called Ellie's, and it sat on the edge of Route 47 like something the highway had simply forgotten to swallow. Two windows fogged with grease and winter breath. A hand-painted sign above the door, red letters bleeding into white, that read, "Hot food." Hot coffee, in a font so faded, it looked like a confession. The parking lot was cracked asphalt and frozen mud, and at the far end of it, angled toward the road like it might leave at any moment, sat a 2003 Harley-Davidson Road King with a cracked left mirror and a Tennessee plate so road-worn the numbers had begun to disappear. The bike belonged to Rhett Maddox. Everything else he owned was somewhere on the highway behind him, or buried in places he tried not to think about. He'd been sitting at the counter for 40 minutes. Counter stool 3 from the left, the one that wobbled when you shifted your weight. He'd chosen it deliberately. A man who sat on an unstable stool had a reason to stay still. He'd ordered black coffee twice. He hadn't eaten. The waitress, a tired woman in her 50s named Carol, who wore her name tag slightly crooked, had stopped asking if he wanted anything else after the first refusal. She'd looked at his hands when she poured the second cup, the knuckles, the old scar tissue along his left thumb, and she'd looked away without comment. That was the right response. Rhett respected it. Outside, the sky had been threatening snow since noon. It was now past 3. The clouds over the hills had gone the color of old bruises, and the temperature was dropping in increments that felt deliberate, like something squeezing slowly. Trucks moved along Route 47 with their headlights already on. The bare trees along the shoulder bent in the same direction, collectively, like an audience leaning forward. Rhett wrapped both hands around his mug and let the heat move through his palms without tasting the coffee. I was 43 years old. He looked older in some lights and younger when he wasn't thinking about it. There was a scar that ran from just below his left eye to the edge of his jaw. Not dramatic, just present, like a sentence that had been interrupted. His hair was dark and going silver at the temples. His leather cut, black and worn soft as old skin, carried the patch of a club he no longer claimed but hadn't stopped wearing. Iron Hollow MC. The stitching was unraveling at one corner. He hadn't fixed it. He had driven 316 miles that day without a destination, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he'd stopped. Rhett Maddox did not stop at diners. He ate at gas stations or not at all. He stopped for fuel and for nothing else. But something about Route 47, the particular quality of the light through the trees maybe, or the way the cold had a color to it this afternoon, had pulled him off the highway with the slow insistence of a current, and he'd found himself in the parking lot of Ellie's before he'd consciously decided to come here. He didn't examine that too closely. He'd learned, at some point between Fallujah and the Tennessee state line, that the mind had reasons it didn't share with the rest of you. The diner had 4 other customers. A trucker in a booth by the door, eating meatloaf with the focused energy of a man on a schedule. An elderly couple near the back, sharing a piece of pie, not talking. A younger man in a gray hoodie at the far end of the counter, scrolling his phone. Carol moved between them with practiced economy. Refill here, check there, never unnecessary steps. The radio above the pie case murmured something country, all steel guitar and longing. The heating unit under the counter kicked on every few minutes with a sound like a held breath. It was, all things considered, an ordinary afternoon. Then the bell above the door screamed, not rang, screamed. The kind of frantic collision of metal against metal that happens when a door is hit hard, thrown open with body weight rather than a hand. Every head in the diner turned. The trucker stopped chewing. The elderly woman's fork went still over the pie plate. Carol looked up from the coffee station. The girl came in fast. She was small, Maybe 7, maybe 8. The kind of age where size and maturity haven't yet aligned, dark hair tangled around her face. She was wearing a lavender coat that was 2 sizes too big, one button missing, and her sneakers were the wrong choice for the weather. Canvas, thin-soled, clearly soaked through. Her face was white with cold except for 2 bright spots of red high on her cheeks. Her eyes were enormous and moving constantly, scanning the room in the way that Rhett recognized with a visceral, immediate certainty. Not as a child looking for a parent, not as a lost kid looking for help, but as something specific and trained down by terror. She was looking for the place to disappear into. Her gaze moved across the trucker, the elderly couple, the man with the phone, Carol, and then it found Rhett, and it stopped. He didn't know why she chose him. He looked like exactly the kind of person a child should be afraid of. The cut, the scars, the stillness that people sometimes mistook for threat. Later, when he tried to understand it, he could only think that maybe fear recognized something in fear. That the kind of danger she was running from looked different from the kind of danger Rhett Maddox represented. And in that moment, different was enough. She crossed the diner in 6 steps. She put both arms around his leg, pressed her face against the leather of his cut, and said, very quietly, almost inaudible against the radio and the heating unit and the distant passage of a truck outside, but please don't let go. The diner went completely silent, not the way places go quiet when something funny happens, or when someone raises their voice. The silence that fell over Ellie's in that moment was the other kind, the kind that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your eardrums. Carol set down the coffee carafe without sound. The trucker put his fork on the edge of his plate. Even the radio seemed to lower itself, as though the music understood. Rhett looked down at her. He could feel the trembling in her arms, small, rapid, the way a wire vibrates when current runs through it. Her grip on his leg was not a child's grip, soft and instinctual. It was the grip of someone who had already tried other options and found them closed. He could feel that in her fingers. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He placed one hand, very carefully, very slowly, on the back of her head, and he kept his eyes level, scanning the room over her, then the window. The man was standing just outside the glass. It was maybe 30 feet away, near the edge of the parking lot, positioned between the diner entrance and the road. Medium height, dark jacket, hands in his pockets. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there in the cold with the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was a form of control. His face was turned toward the diner window. Rhett couldn't see his expression clearly through the condensation and the distance, but he could see the direction of the man's attention, and the direction was here, on the girl, on Rhett's counterstool, on this exact spot. Something moved through Rhett's chest that was not quite fear and not quite rage. It was older than both of those things. It was the sensation, one he knew well, had trained into his muscles and his breathing through years of war, of a situation resolving itself into clarity, when everything extraneous fell away and what remained was simply the geometry of threat and protection and the small, immediate decisions that determined which way a thing went. He'd felt it in Fallujah. He'd felt it in the Korengal. He'd felt it twice in bar fights he hadn't started, and once on a dark road outside of Memphis, when 3 men decided his bike looked easier to take than it was. He hadn't felt it in 2 years. He'd started to wonder if that part of him had finally gone quiet for good. "Hey," he said. His voice was low. Not soft. Low, controlled. The way you spoke to someone who needed calm more than comfort. "What's your name?" She didn't answer immediately. Her face was still pressed against his cut. "Mila," she said finally, into the leather. "Mila." He said it back. Not a question, just an acknowledgement. "I heard you. You're real. You're here." "You okay?" A pause. Then, small and careful. "I don't think so." He kept his hand on her head. He kept his eyes on the window. The man hadn't moved. Carol had materialized silently at his end of the counter. She was looking at Rhett with the careful, questioning attention of a woman who had seen a few things and knew better than to charge into a situation before she understood it. He met her eyes and shifted his gaze briefly, intentionally, toward the window. Carol looked. He watched her face change. Not dramatically, just a tightening, a recognition. "You want more coffee?" she said. "Hot chocolate," Rhett said. For her. Carol nodded and moved away. No questions. He appreciated that more than he could express. He shifted slightly on the stool, the wobble, the familiar instability, and looked down at the girl again. She'd loosened her grip a fraction, which told him the trembling was easing. Not gone, but easing. He could work with easing. "You like whales?" he asked. She looked up at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark brown, very direct, slightly confused by the question. "What?" "Whales. The big ones. In the ocean." He kept his voice the same, low, unhurried. "Blue whales. You know how big they are?" A beat. "No. Heart's the size of a small car. You could fit inside the aorta. That's a tube in the heart. Crawl right through it. Some scientists actually did that. Research." He was watching the window in his peripheral vision. The man was still there. "Their calls travel 1,000 miles through the water. Whale on one side of the ocean talking to a whale on the other side. Takes about 20 minutes for the sound to get there." Mila was looking at him steadily now. The terror was still in her face, but there was something else layered over it. The particular expression children get when they encounter something genuinely strange from an adult. Curiosity, working against fear. "Why are you telling me about whales?" she asked. "Because it's something true that's also incredible," he said. "And sometimes those are the only things worth talking about." Carol set a mug of hot chocolate on the counter in front of Mila. It had a spoonful of whipped cream from a can on top, slightly lopsided. Mila looked at it, then at Rhett, and slowly, with the careful movements of someone uncertain whether good things were allowed to happen, climbed onto the stool beside him. She kept one hand on his arm. He didn't say anything about it. Outside, a gust of wind moved through the parking lot and sent a piece of trash skittering across the asphalt. The man in the dark jacket didn't move. He stood with the patience of someone who had practiced patience, who understood it as a weapon. His hands remained in his pockets. His face was still turned toward the diner. The trucker in the booth had noticed him now, too. Rhett could see it, the way the man's gaze kept traveling to the window, the way he'd pushed his plate away though he hadn't finished eating. The elderly couple hadn't noticed anything. The younger man on his phone had put the phone down and was watching Mila with an uncertain expression, not threat, just awareness. "Is that man outside bad?" Mila asked. She was holding the mug in both hands, not drinking, just holding it for the warmth. She wasn't looking at the window. She knew where the man was. She didn't need to look. Rhett considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He could have said, "I don't know," or probably not. The comforting lies adults gave children in uncertain situations. He looked at her face and saw clearly that she would know the difference. "I don't know what he is," he said, "but I know you're staying right here until we find out." She nodded once, as though this was sufficient, as though the specifics mattered less than the certainty. "Okay," she said, and took her first sip of hot chocolate. Something in Rhett's chest moved in a direction it had not moved in a long time. He kept his expression neutral and watched the window. The man outside finally moved, not away. He turned his body slightly, adjusted his weight, and then he looked directly at the window with the open, unapologetic attention of someone who had no concern about being seen. No attempt at subtlety. That was the tell. The absence of subtlety. A man innocently waiting for someone would look away when he caught the eye of a stranger inside. Would look at his phone, at the sky, at anything but the specific place he'd been watching. This man looked directly at the counter, at the girl, then at Rhett. The eye contact lasted 3 seconds. Then the man looked back at the girl. Rhett felt the temperature of the room change in a way that had nothing to do with the heating unit. "Carol," he said, without raising his voice. She was there in a moment. He leaned slightly toward her and spoke at a volume that didn't carry. "You have a back entrance?" She understood the question. "Storage room, through the kitchen. Comes out by the dumpsters. Is there a phone back there, or just your cell?" "Landline in the kitchen." A pause. "You want me to call someone?" "Sheriff's department. Non-emergency if you can, but mention there's a child involved. Man outside, been watching since she came in. Don't make it obvious you're calling." He met her eyes. "Can you do that quietly?" Carol had been working diners and bars long enough to have developed a particular form of operational calm. She looked at him, looked at the window, looked at Mila, and said, "Give me 2 minutes," and walked toward the kitchen at exactly the same pace she always used. Mila was looking at him again. "You told her to call the police?" "Sheriff's department," he corrected. "Small difference." "Are you a police?" The question carried no particular alarm, just genuine curiosity. He almost smiled. "No." Are you a criminal? He did smile at that, just slightly, just at the corner. That's complicated. My mom says complicated usually means yes. Your mom's pretty smart. Mila seemed to weigh this against something internal, then nodded. She says that too. She looked at the mug, then at the window. He was following me from school. I walk home the same way every day. A pause. He started showing up, first just there, then closer. Today, she stopped. Today he got too close, Rhett said. He touched my arm. Her voice was perfectly flat when she said it. The voice of a child who didn't have the vocabulary for what she felt, but had the precision to report the fact. He said he knew my name. He said... She stopped again. You don't have to say it. He said I should come with him, that my mom had sent him. She finally looked up at Rhett with the full weight of those brown eyes. My mom didn't send him. She doesn't know him. Rhett kept his face still. The thing in his chest, that old, precise, combat-honed awareness, had fully organized itself now, had arranged the geometry of the situation into something with clear lines and clear requirements. He was familiar with that feeling. He'd acted on it 100 times, in circumstances where the cost of inaction was absolute. I was also acutely aware that he was a 43-year-old man with a criminal record sitting in a diner with a child who'd run to him, and that the optics of this, absent context, were complicated in their own right. He kept both hands visible on the counter. You did the right thing, he said, coming inside. I saw your motorcycle, she said. I don't know why, but... She paused, searching for the word. It looked like something that would be hard to argue with. Rhett didn't know what to do with that sentence. He filed it somewhere and kept watching the window. The man outside took a step toward the door. Rhett reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and placed his phone face up on the counter. He opened the camera. He set it pointed at the window. He pressed record. The man's hand was on the door handle. The bell above the door screamed again. The diner's atmosphere changed with the specific physics of threat entering an enclosed space, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the unmistakable alteration of pressure, the way a room knows before the people in it consciously register. The trucker went completely still. The younger man at the end of the counter stood up, very slowly, in the way people stand up when they're not sure whether to stand up. The couple in the back didn't move. The man in the dark jacket stood just inside the doorway. I was closer now. Rhett could see him properly. Late 30s or early 40s, unremarkable face, the kind that was specifically engineered to be unremarkable, that your memory would slide off of. Clean-shaven. Eyes that were pale and doing too much work, cataloging the room with a rapidity that wasn't casual. I was wearing a dark jacket, jeans, work boots that hadn't done any work. His hands, free of his pockets now, were at his sides. His gaze moved across the diner and landed on the counter, on Mila, on Rhett. It stayed there. Rhett had his coffee mug in his right hand. His left was on the counter, a few inches from Mila's arm, close enough that she could feel the proximity without him touching her. He kept his eyes slightly to the left of the man's face, not looking directly at him, not looking away. The combat trick. You saw more in peripheral vision than you did in direct focus, and you gave less away. Mila. The man's voice was conversational, practiced. He was speaking as though Rhett weren't there, as though the counter and the coffee and the camera phone were furniture. Come on, sweetheart. Your mom's waiting. Mila's hand closed on Rhett's forearm. He felt it, the small, specific pressure of her fingers, the exact grip, and filed it alongside everything else he was tracking. She's finishing her drink, Rhett said. The man looked at him properly for the first time. The pale eyes ran a quick assessment, cut, scars, posture, hands, and he made a decision, which was to keep his voice even. This isn't your business, man. I'm her uncle. That right. Yeah, her mom asked me to pick her up. He shifted his weight. His left hand moved slightly, and Rhett watched it. Mila, come on. She's good, Rhett said. A beat. The friendly tone developed a layer of hardness underneath it, the way ice develops on running water. I don't think you understand the situation. I think I understand it fine. There's no reason for this to become, she's not leaving with you, Rhett said. Simple. No heat. The same tone he'd used to say there's a second shooter, northwest corner, 40 meters. The tone that meant the assessment was complete, the decision was made, the conversation had ended. The room was absolutely still. The man's eyes moved to Mila. Mila, look at me. She She turned her face away and pressed her forehead against Rhett's arm. Something moved across the man's expression. Not frustration, something older and uglier. He took one step toward the counter, and then the kitchen door swung open, and Carol came out with the specific energy of a woman who has done this before, who has called the number and is counting the minutes and needs to hold the line until the clock runs out. And she said loudly, to no one in particular, "Coffee's fresh. Anybody want a refill?" The man stopped. He looked at Carol, at Rhett, at the phone on the counter, camera forward. His assessment recalibrated. "We're fine," Rhett said to Carol, without breaking his attention from the man. "Thank you." The man stood in the center of Ellie's diner for 4 more seconds. Rhett counted them. Then he turned and walked out. The bell above the door hit the frame with a sound like a gunshot. The room exhaled. "He's not gone," Rhett said quietly, for Carol, who was already at the window. "He'll be in the lot." "Deputy Harrison, 7 minutes out," she said. "Dispatch confirmed." The trucker said loudly to nobody, "The hell was that?" "Stay seated," Rhett said, and something in his voice, the flatness, the authority, the absolute absence of uncertainty, made the trucker nod and stay exactly where he was. Mila had not moved. Her forehead was still against his arm, both hands around his forearm now, and he could feel her breathing. Too fast, too shallow, working toward control. He turned slightly on the stool, facing her, breaking protocol about keeping eyes on the window, because some things ranked higher than protocol. "Hey!" He waited until she looked up. "He's outside. He's not coming back in." He held her gaze. "Do you understand why he's not coming back in?" She shook her head slightly. "Because you're not alone anymore." He said it simply, without drama, the way you stated a fact. That changes the math. People who do what he does, they rely on a kid being alone. You stopped being alone about 30 seconds after you walked through that door. A pause. "You made a good call." Her lower lip moved. For a moment he thought she was going to cry, and he would have let her, would have sat there and let the whole thing happen without flinching. But she didn't. She pressed her lips together and took one slow breath through her nose, and then she said with remarkable steadiness, "I'm not usually scared." "I know," he said. "You don't know me, no. But you ran 4 blocks in soaking sneakers in 30-degree weather, and then gave me an entirely accurate account of what happened." He picked up his coffee. "That's not the behavior of someone who scares easily." She considered this. "He knew my name," she said, and the steadiness cracked just slightly at the edges. "He knew where I walked, every day. He knew." She swallowed. That's the part the deputy is going to want to hear," Rhett said. "Can you tell it to him the way you told it to me?" A pause. "Will you stay while I do?" He looked at her. 7 or 8 years old, soaking sneakers, one button missing on a lavender coat too big for her, dark eyes carrying 3 times more awareness than a child her age should have to carry, asking a man who looked like danger to please stay while she was brave. "Yes," he said. She nodded once, as though the word was everything she needed, as though it was the wall between her and whatever was outside in the parking lot. 7 minutes. Rhett drank his coffee and kept his phone recording and kept his peripheral vision on the window, and Carol refilled Mila's hot chocolate without being asked, and the trucker moved to the stool on Mila's other side with the casual deliberateness of a man who understood the principle of closing ranks, and nobody said anything about it, and it was the most human thing Rhett had seen in months. The deputy's cruiser pulled in with its lights going but no siren. The man in the dark jacket was still in the parking lot. I was detained outside, 2 minutes, no drama, 1 pair of cuffs, and the specific quality of collapse that happened in a man when the thing he'd been relying on, solitude, uncertainty, the absence of witnesses, was taken away all at once. Rhett watched it through the window without satisfaction. He'd seen that collapse before, in different circumstances, and it never felt like victory. It felt like a door closing just before something worse came through. Deputy Nathan Harrison was 30, efficient, with the kind of face that had learned to stay neutral without becoming cold. He came into Ellie's, nodded at Carol, scanned the room, and settled on Rhett and Mila with the appraising attention of a man doing rapid triage. His gaze stayed on Rhett's cut for exactly 1 second longer than everything else. Rhett held his gaze and said nothing. "She okay?" Harrison asked Carol. "Ask her," Carol said. "She's 8. Harrison crouched down to Mila's eye level with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. "Hey, Mila. My name's Nathan. You did really good today. Can you talk to me for a minute? Mila looked at Rhett. He nodded. She looked at Harrison. Yes, she said. The interview was gentle and efficient. Harrison had a small notebook and took notes in the compact script of someone trained to write while listening. Mila told him everything she'd told Rhett and more. Dates, routes, the specific things the man had said to her, the day he'd first appeared near the school, the way it had escalated. She was precise and unflinching, and Rhett sat beside her on his wobbling stool and drank the last of his coffee and felt something that was not quite wonder, but was adjacent to it. Children, he'd learned, real ones, unbroken by the particular variety of damage this girl had clearly not yet been subjected to, had a clarity that adults spent years trying to recover. They saw things directly. They named things with the words that fit them. They did not perform bravery. They either were brave or they weren't, and there was no performance involved in the assessment. This girl was brave. When the interview concluded, Harrison looked at Rhett with a directness that acknowledged the cut and the scars and the past they implied, and then moved past them. You got footage? Rhett handed him the phone. Harrison watched it, nodded, handed it back. That's going to help. He paused. You go by Maddox? Yes. A beat. Iron Hollow. Used to be. Harrison looked at him for a moment. The specific look of a law enforcement officer recalibrating in real time, making an assessment that had nothing to do with the paperwork and everything to do with the person in front of him. Then he said simply, "Good job today." And it wasn't followed by "considering" or "for a guy like you," and Rhett appreciated the absence of those words more than he would have been able to explain. I was filling out his contact information on Harrison's form when the diner bell sounded again. She came in fast. Not the panicked sprint of a terrified child, but the barely controlled velocity of a parent who had received a call. No parent ever wanted to receive, and had covered the distance between that call and this diner on pure adrenaline and love. She was maybe 32, 33, wearing scrubs under a winter coat she hadn't fully buttoned, dark hair pulled back with the kind of haphazardness that meant it had been done at a sprint. Her face was pale and sharp-edged and beautiful in the way things are beautiful when stripped down to pure necessity. She saw Mila and the look that crossed her face, relief colliding with what had been terror at a velocity that had no business being visible, broke something in the room. Mom. Mila said it simply and slid off the stool. Avery Hartwell came across the diner and dropped to her knees on the wooden floor and pulled her daughter into her arms without any concern for dignity or the damp or the fact that she was kneeling on old floor in front of strangers, and held her with the fierce, shaking grip of someone who had, for 20 minutes, genuinely contemplated a world in which this reunion did not happen. Rhett looked away. He looked at his empty coffee mug. He looked at the window, at the parking lot where the deputy's lights were still going. He looked at his hands on the counter, the scar tissue, the knuckles, the old damage mapped across the skin. He didn't know what he felt exactly. It was the kind of feeling that didn't have a clean name, that lived in the chest rather than the head, that arrived from somewhere older than language. He felt needed, not used, not leveraged, not deployed. Needed. The specific weight of having been the right person in the right place, not through any planning or virtue, but simply through the collision of circumstance and the ancient animal decision to not walk away from something that required him to stay. He had walked away from so much, over so many years. He hadn't walked away today. I was still sitting there, not moving, not intruding on the reunion, when Avery looked up over her daughter's shoulder and found his face. She said nothing. She was still shaking slightly, still kneeling on the floor, her eyes bright with the tears she was holding back through sheer effort. She looked at the cut, at the scars, at the empty coffee mug, and the wobbling stool, and the man who looked like danger, and had, somehow, been exactly the opposite. She said, "You stayed with her." "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, which was long enough. "Thank you," she said, and the words were simple and insufficient, and she knew it and said them anyway, and they landed with the specific weight of someone who understood that what she was describing was larger than any available word could hold. Rhett nodded once. He looked back at his mug. Harrison took the Hartwell family through the next steps with quiet efficiency. Statements, contact information, the preliminary charges against the man now in the back of the cruiser outside. The early information coming back from dispatch was already concerning. The suspect's name was flagging things. Locations. a pattern that had been invisible until this afternoon, when a terrified girl in soaking sneakers had run into a roadside diner and chosen a scarred biker to trust, and the pieces had begun to connect. Rhett didn't hear most of it. He was aware of it, the shape of it, the implication, but he was somewhere else in his head. He was thinking about the 3 seconds between the man outside touching Mila's arm and Mila deciding to run. He was thinking about what she'd said. It looked like something that would be hard to argue with, and the particular accuracy of that as a description of both the bike and the person. He was thinking about the way she'd pressed her face against his cut in those first seconds, the absolute trust of it, the absence of any calculation. Children did not trust like that without reason. He didn't know what reason she'd found in him. He was not sure he was comfortable with it. He pulled on his jacket and stood from the stool. "You're leaving?" Mila's voice. He looked at her. She was beside her mother now, her mother's arm around her, her own coat properly buttoned again. She was watching him with the direct, assessing attention she'd turned on the whole afternoon. Clear, unadorned, the kind of look that costs something to maintain. "Deputy's got everything he needs," he said. A pause. Then, "Will you come back?" The question sat in the diner like a stone dropped in still water, and the rings moved outward from it in every direction. Carol was at the coffee station and went still. Harrison was at the door and paused. Avery's hand tightened briefly on her daughter's shoulder. Rhett stood with his jacket half-zipped and the winter pressing against the windows and the heating unit ticking on under the counter. And he looked at a girl who had run to him and trusted him and told him she wasn't usually scared and told him the truth about her mother and asked him whether he was a criminal without flinching at the possibility. And he understood, in the way that he'd understood other things at the exact moment they became irreversible, that the question she was asking was not about this diner or this afternoon. She was asking whether he was a person who stayed. He had never been that person. He had spent 20 years being precisely the opposite. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had a card that was 3 years old, Iron Hollow MC, Rhett Maddox, with a phone number that still worked. He set it on the counter beside the empty coffee mug. "That's my number," he said. He zipped his jacket and walked toward the door. I was 3 steps from the exit when he heard it. Not a voice, not a word, but a sound, barely audible under the radio and the heating unit and the muffled noise of Harrison's radio outside, a sound like a held breath finally releasing. He did not turn around. He pushed the door open and went out into the cold Tennessee afternoon, and the bell hit the frame behind him, and the wind off Route 47 came in off the highway with the particular bite of a winter that had decided it was done being patient. He stood in the parking lot beside his bike. Across the lot, Harrison was putting the suspect in the back of the cruiser. The man's face was turned away. His shoulders were angled inward in that particular posture, something between collapse and contrition, though Rhett knew from long experience that it was neither. It was calculation. It was the posture of a man recalibrating. Rhett pulled out his own phone and made a call. 2 rings. A voice like gravel over asphalt. "You're alive. I need to know if you still have contacts in the Sevier County Sheriff's." A pause. "This about the thing on Route 47? Rhett looked at the cruiser. "Word travels. Scanner app. Half the chapter runs them." Another pause. "What did you walk into, Maddox?" "Not sure yet." He looked at the diner window. Through the condensation in the distance, he could see the pale shape of Mila standing with her mother at the counter, a small shape in a lavender coat. Could be larger than what's visible. "You staying in the county?" He hadn't planned to. He'd planned to be in the next state by nightfall. He had no reason to stay in Harding County, Tennessee. He had no motel, no destination, no obligation. The road was open and cold and waiting. "For now," he said. A low sound, somewhere between acknowledgement and satisfaction, from the voice on the other end. "I'll make some calls." Then, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like something woke up." A beat. "Try not to do anything stupid." The call ended. Rhett put the phone in his pocket and looked at the sky, which had finally decided on snow. The first flakes were coming down light and unhurried, the way things that have decided to happen don't feel the need to rush. They settled on the asphalt and the windshield of the cruiser and the chrome of the Road King and on the shoulders of Rhett Maddox's jacket, and he stood in them for a moment without moving. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. 4 words. "We know who you are." He looked at the message for a long time. Then he looked at the cruiser. at the suspect in the back seat, at the diner window. Harrison had run the man's ID 20 minutes ago. The preliminary return had flagged locations, a pattern. Rhett had assumed that was the whole story. One man, one pattern, the kind of isolated predation that law enforcement handled every day. But the text in his hand meant that somewhere, someone had been watching this parking lot, had been watching long enough to see Rhett Maddox stand up, had the capability to find an unlisted number in the time it took to make one phone call. The man in the cruiser was not alone. The snow was coming down harder now, and the highway lights were blinking on along Route 47. And somewhere inside Ellie's diner, a small girl in a lavender coat was telling her mother about whales. Rhett Maddox looked at the 4 words on his phone screen, and then he walked back toward the diner, because whatever had woken up inside him when that girl had grabbed his leg and asked him not to let go had apparently not finished making its requirements known. He pushed open the door. The bell hit the frame, and every eye in the room turned to him. Carol, Harrison, Avery, the trucker, the couple in the back. And Mila looked up from her mother's side, and her face did something complicated and quiet and true. "I thought you left," she said. "Changed my mind," he said. He sat back down on the wobbling stool and put his phone face down on the counter. He did not show anyone the message. Not yet. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and didn't take it out again for the rest of the evening. That was the decision. Not the one about staying, not the one about sitting back down on the wobbling stool, but the one about the message. The 4 words that someone had taken the time to compose and send from a number that wouldn't trace back to anything. "We know who you are." He could have shown it to Harrison. Should have, probably, by any reasonable accounting of the situation. Harrison was standing 6 feet away with a radio and a cruiser and the infrastructure of a county sheriff's department behind him, and the message was relevant evidence in what was beginning to look like something considerably larger than one man in a dark jacket. Rhett didn't show it to him. I wasn't entirely sure why, and that uncertainty was itself information, about the state of him, about the instincts that were running underneath the conscious decisions, about whatever had woken up in him when a girl with soaking sneakers had grabbed his leg in a roadside diner. He sat on the stool and drank the 3rd coffee Carol put in front of him without being asked, and he kept his face neutral, and he watched Harrison take Avery's statement with the patient efficiency of a man who understood his job, and he watched Mila sit beside her mother with her hands folded in her lap, answering follow-up questions with the same unflinching precision she'd shown all afternoon. Outside, the snow was committing. Not the tentative early flakes of an hour ago, but the real thing, coming down with weight and intention, filling the parking lot and the highway shoulder and the bare crowns of the trees along Route 47 with the particular silence that only snow could manufacture. The suspect's cruiser had left 20 minutes ago. The lot was empty except for Harrison's vehicle, a rusted Chevy that belonged to the trucker, and Rhett's Road King, which was collecting a thin layer of white along the handlebars and the tank. He should have covered it. He didn't move. At some point, the trucker left. At some point, the elderly couple shuffled out through the back, at Carol's quiet suggestion, in the specific way that civilians exited situations when people with authority told them it was fine, but the body language said otherwise. Carol herself moved between the counter and the kitchen with the contained efficiency of someone providing a service. Hot food for Mila, fresh coffee for Harrison, the slow, deliberate choreography of a woman keeping a room operational because operational was what the room needed to be. Harrison finished at 9:14. He gave Avery a card with his direct number and the case number, and the preliminary information about what they were looking at. And the what they were looking at part changed something in Avery Hartwell's face. Not visibly, not in any way she let her daughter see. But Rhett was watching, and he saw the color leave her skin and the particular stillness that replaced it. The stillness of a parent processing information about how close a thing had come. Harrison shook Rhett's hand at the door. Firm grip, eye contact, no commentary about the cut or the record or the complications of the situation. Just, "I'll be in touch about the footage. Gave my number to Ms. Hartwell. She has yours?" "Counter," Rhett said. "Right." Harrison looked at him for a moment with the assessing attention he'd used all evening. "You got a place to stay tonight?" "Working on it." A beat. Ridgeline Motel, 1.5 miles east on 47. Reasonable. They don't ask questions. He said it without inflection, which was its own kind of communication. Then he pushed the door open and went out into the snow. The bell hit the frame. The diner was quiet. Carol was cleaning the far end of the counter. Mila had fallen asleep in the booth behind them, curled against the window, her lavender coat folded under her head as a pillow. Avery was sitting across the counter from Rhett, both hands around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from, looking at the space between them. She was more composed now than she'd been when she came through the door. The composure had the quality of something rebuilt under pressure. Not natural, not easy, but real. She was still in her scrubs. She'd called ahead to the hospital to say she was unavailable for her remaining 2 hours. Rhett had heard her make the call, had heard the specific register of her voice, the "I'm a professional" tone layered over the "my child was in danger" reality, and had looked at his mug and given her the privacy of not witnessing it. "Nurse?" he asked. She looked up. "ER. Long day before this. 12-hour shift." She looked at her coffee. "I was 40 minutes from the end when Harrison called." He didn't say anything. "She's been telling me," Avery said, "for 2 weeks, that someone was following her." She said it quietly, into the mug, and the words had a weight that was clearly being put down, carried somewhere, and finally set on a surface. "I reported it, told the school, filed a... There's a form at the county office for... I did everything." A pause. "They said they'd look into it." Rhett turned his mug on the counter, said nothing. "They didn't look into it." She looked up at him. Her eyes were clear and exhausted and furious in equal proportions. "A $35 parking violation I got last year got followed up on faster than my daughter's safety report. A beat. That's the world." "Yeah," he said. She looked at him for a moment. The cut, the scars, the man who had stayed when every reasonable calculation suggested he shouldn't have. "Why did you come back? When you left?" "You came back." She frowned slightly, not unkindly. "Why?" He thought about the text message in his pocket, about telling her, about the geometry of what that information would do to the composure she'd just rebuilt. "Felt wrong to leave," he said. She studied him. "That's not the whole answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. "I'll tell you when I know more," he said. It was not the answer most people would have accepted. Avery Hartwell looked at him for 3 more seconds and then nodded, once, as though she'd run the calculation, who he was, what he'd done today, what the nod cost her, and found the math acceptable. She woke Mila gently at 9:45. Mila surfaced from sleep with the disoriented grace of a child, blinking, looking around the diner with the briefly panicked expression of someone who'd forgotten where safe was. Then she found Rhett on the stool, and the panic dissolved. "You're still here," she said. "Ridgeline Motel," he said. "1.5 miles." She considered this. "That's not very far." "No," he said. "It's not." She seemed to find this mathematically satisfying. She let her mother button the lavender coat. The missing button would need a pin for now. Avery improvised with something from her bag, and accepted her backpack and took her mother's hand, and then, at the door, turned back. "The whale," she said. "The one whose call takes 20 minutes to reach the other whale." A pause. "Does the other whale answer?" He hadn't expected the question. He took a moment. "Yeah, they do. Same call, back across the water. Even after 20 minutes? Even after." She thought about this with the serious, unrushed attention she brought to everything. "Okay," she said, and turned and went out into the snow with her mother. The bell sounded. Rhett sat in the empty diner with Carol cleaning behind him, and the road outside white and silent, and the text message in his pocket like a coal against his ribs. "We know who you are." He pulled out his phone. He pulled up a different number than the one he'd called earlier. This one he hadn't used in 8 months. He stared at it for a moment, at the name above it, 2 words, Cage Dillard, and then he pressed call. 4 rings. 5. He was preparing to hang up when the line opened. Silence first, then breathing, then, "You've got a nerve." "Cage. 8 months." The voice was low and measured and contained the specific variety of cold that came from genuine injury rather than performance. 8 months, Maddox, not a word. Not a, "You couldn't even..." "I know." "Do you?" Wasn't a question. Rhett looked at the snow on his bike through the window, the white layer on the handlebars. "I need eyes on something. Harding County. Whatever's running through the regional network about a child predator case on Route 47 tonight." A long pause, the kind that had texture to it. "You're in Harding County," Cage said. "Yes. Tonight." "Yes. Another pause. Are you in it or watching it? Both. The sound on the other end of the line was not quite a laugh and not quite a curse. It was the sound of a man confronting something inevitable that he'd hoped to avoid. I'm going to need more than that, Rhett told him. Compact, precise, the diner, the girl, the man in the dark jacket, Harrison's preliminary flag, the text message. He read the 4 words from the screen. We know who you are. The silence on the other end when he finished was different from the previous ones. This was the silence of a man thinking fast. Give me the number it came from, Cage said. Rhett read it, keys in the background. A pause. Then, that number was registered in Knoxville, bought prepaid 3 weeks ago. Another pause, longer. Maddox. Harrison's preliminary flag. Did he say what he was seeing? Said it was concerning, didn't give specifics. The suspect's name, did you get it? No. More keys. A sound like a chair moving, the specific creak of weight shifting on old wood. Cage was in the chapter house then. Rhett could picture it without trying, could feel the dimensions of that room, the smell of it, oil and coffee, and the specific dustiness of old leather and maps. He'd spent years in that room. He'd left without saying goodbye to it. There's been a network operating in this region, Cage said finally. His voice had gone flat in the particular way that meant he was being careful about what he transmitted over a phone line. For about 18 months. Multiple counties. Law enforcement's been aware of it, loosely. Hasn't coalesced into actionable intel yet. A beat. Your girl wasn't the first. The coffee mug was empty. Rhett turned it on the counter. How many? I don't know the number. I know it's more than one. A pause. The text means someone in proximity saw you make the phone call and ran your name fast enough to respond in real time. That's not one guy with a burner phone. No, Rhett said. You understand what I'm saying. I understand. Another pause, longer than the others. When Cage spoke again, his voice had shifted. Not softened, but changed register, the way a road changes surface without warning. Why are you calling me? Because you have contacts I don't. That's not what I'm asking. The diner was very quiet. Carol had gone into the kitchen, leaving Rhett alone at the counter. The heating unit ticked. Outside, the snow continued its unhurried work on Route 47. I don't know, Rhett said. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in over a year. He didn't argue with that. You should know, Cage said, that not everyone in the chapter has the same feelings about you that I do. A pause. Royce is sergeant at arms now. Something tightened in Rhett's jaw. Since when? 6 months. Knox pushed it through. Another pause. He's been vocal. About me. About the circumstances of your leaving. The careful phrasing of a man walking a wire. About what you owe. Rhett looked at his hands on the counter. The scar tissue. The old damage. I owe a lot of things. I know. They know. Cage's voice was stripped of everything now, down to the essential. You call this number, Maddox. You're not calling just me. Word travels in the chapter. It'll be known by morning that you're in Harding County and you're involved in something. I can't control what Royce does with that. I know. You're calling anyway. Yes. The pause this time was the longest of all. Rhett waited it out. All right, Cage said finally. The word carried weight. Not approval, not forgiveness, but something functional. Something that said, I'm making a choice and I know what it costs. I'll make some calls. Don't move tonight. Get off the road. Whatever that text means, they already know you're there. The call ended. Rhett sat for a moment with the dead phone in his hand, and then he put it away and zipped his jacket and left 2 20s on the counter, more than the coffee cost, not enough for what Carol had done, and went out into the snow. The Ridgeline Motel was exactly what Harrison had described. 12 rooms in an L-shape, exterior corridor, a vending machine near the office with a light that flickered every 4 seconds. A parking lot that the snow had claimed completely, except for the tire tracks of recent arrivals. The man at the desk didn't look at Rhett's cut. He took cash without comment, handed over a key attached to a worn plastic diamond, room 7, and went back to his television. The room smelled like the particular compound of industrial cleaner and cigarette smoke and the faint organic underpresence of 100 strangers. Single bed, single lamp, a window that faced the parking lot. Rhett didn't turn on the overhead light. He sat on the edge of the bed in the lamplight and put his phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. He slept 3 hours, maybe 4. He woke at 4 a.m. with the specific alertness of someone whose internal alarm system had never been properly decommissioned and lay still for a moment, cataloging the sounds. Wind, highway, the distant bark of something animal, the flicker of the vending machine light against the window curtain. Nothing wrong. Nothing immediate. He sat up and reached for his phone. 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize. No voicemail. The calls had come between 2 and 3 a.m., spaced 20 minutes apart. He stared at the number for a moment, then pulled up the text message again. Different number. He wrote them both down on the notepad from the nightstand. Motel stationery, thin paper, a pen that barely worked, and then went to the window and looked out at the lot. A truck was parked 2 spaces from his bike. Dark, no plates visible under the snow. It hadn't been there when he'd arrived. He stood at the window for a long time without moving. The truck didn't move either. At 6 a.m., he called Harrison. The deputy answered on the second ring, which told Rhett he'd been awake. Maddox. Truck in the Ridgeline lot, dark, no visible plates. Been there since approximately 0200. A pause. You get a model? F250, I think. Dark blue or black, hard to tell under the snow. Harrison's tone had shifted into the same flat operational register Cage had used the previous night. Don't approach it. I'll send a unit. The suspect. Can you give me his name? A longer pause. That's an active investigation. I know. I can't. Harrison stopped. A breath. Then, Marcus Veal, 38, prior in 2 counties in Georgia, served 18 months, got out 4 years ago. Clean record since, or appeared to be. Another pause. What Harrison said last night about it being larger than it looked. That's accurate. More than I can tell you over the phone. But you're telling me he wasn't alone. I'm telling you to stay inside until the unit gets there. Rhett looked at the truck. At the Road King beside it, snow-covered, patient. Harrison, the text message. We know who you are. Whoever sent that, they know about Iron Hollow. Silence. Yeah, Harrison said. I figured that was possible. Meaning they have resources. Someone who could run a name from a bike plate in real time. Meaning, Harrison said carefully, that whatever this is, it has reach. And you standing between Marcus Veal and that little girl yesterday put your name on a list that wasn't in your interest to be on. A pause. Unit 7 minutes out. Stay inside. Rhett looked at the truck. He put the phone down and dressed in 40 seconds, by long habit. Boots, jeans, thermal, jacket. He didn't put the cut on. He looked at it laid over the back of the desk chair, the Iron Hollow patch, the unraveling corner, and left it. He went out the room's back window instead of the door. The cold hit him with the specific meanness of a Tennessee winter morning, dry and bladed. The snow had stopped sometime in the night and left everything pristine and sharp-edged, the kind of morning that looked clean and was indifferent to what you did in it. He moved along the back wall of the motel, around the corner, parallel to the parking lot, staying in the shadows thrown by the exterior corridor overhang. The truck was a dark blue F250. The engine was cold. He could hear the absence of it. It had been parked here a while. He approached from the rear, moving along the snow with the careful foot placement of someone who understood that sound carried differently in cold, still air. He got within 10 feet and stopped. 2 people in the cab. He could see them through the rear window. Heads, not moving much. A larger shape in the driver's seat. A smaller one in the passenger side. Neither appeared to be watching the motel. Both were watching the parking lot entrance. They weren't watching for him coming out of his room. They were watching for something coming in. He stood in the shadow of the corridor overhang and changed his assessment of the situation in real time, the way you did when new information revised the geometry. They weren't here for him. Or not primarily. They were watching the lot entrance, which meant they were watching for someone else to arrive. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Text. Cage. 2 bikes on County Road 12. 10 minutes out. Maddox do not engage until they get there. He looked at the text for 1 second. Then he looked at the truck. A County Road 12 was east. The motel's only entrance was from Route 47 to the south. If whoever was in that truck was watching the 47 entrance, and bikes were coming down County Road 12, he put the phone in his pocket and moved. He came around the passenger side of the truck low and fast, and knocked twice on the glass with the flat of his hand. Not aggressive, just present, The knock that said, "I see you and this game is over," and stepped back. The window came down 4 inches. A woman, 50s, hard-faced in the particular way of someone who'd spent years outdoors or in difficult places, gray hair cut short, eyes that had already done a complete tactical assessment of Rhett before the window was fully down. She had a canvas jacket and both hands visible on her lap, which he registered and appreciated. "You Maddox?" she said. He looked at her. "Who's asking?" "Lena Strand. I'm an investigator out of the state AG's office." She held up a badge with the practiced ease of someone who'd shown it 1,000 times. He looked at it, real, or good enough that the distinction didn't matter in a parking lot at 6 a.m. "That's my partner, Dex." The larger shape in the driver's seat raised a hand without turning. "We've been on the Veal network for 11 months. Rhett stood in the cold with the hard light of a winter morning coming off the snow and said nothing. "We know about the text message," Lena said. "We know you didn't show it to Harrison last night. We were in the diner." He looked at her steadily. The elderly couple. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise. "Good. What's on County Road 12? He said. Her expression changed. "How do you—" She stopped, looked at his jacket pocket. "You already called someone." "Yes." "Iron Hollow." Not a question. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment with the layered attention of someone integrating multiple information streams simultaneously. "The timing is complicated." "Tell me anyway." She looked at her partner. Some communication passed between them, the compressed gestural language of two people who'd worked together long enough to have their own shorthand. Then she looked back at Rhett. Marcus Veal was not the primary actor in this network. He was a contact point, a spotter. She paused. "Whoever runs this is significantly more sophisticated. They have reach into county-level systems. That's how they ran your name in real time. They have people distributed across multiple jurisdictions. And when Veal was detained last night," another pause, "they would have moved to limit exposure." "Meaning," Rhett said, "meaning Mila Hartwell is still a loose end to them. She saw Veal. She can identify him. And she has a mother who already filed a report that got ignored once. Meaning she's the kind of parent who pushes." The cold was very thorough in the silence that followed. "You're saying she's not safe," he said. "I'm saying last night changed the geometry." Lena held his gaze. "They don't know what she told Harrison. They don't know what footage exists. They don't know what Veal said or didn't say. From their position, Mila Hartwell is an unknown variable in a system that requires certainty." She paused. "And unknown variables get managed." Rhett stood very still. "Who's on County Road 12? He said. The bikes arrived before she could answer. He heard them first, the low, specific growl of Harleys running hard on cold pavement, not the cruise of leisure riding, but the velocity of people with purpose. Two of them, the sound splitting and reassembling as they turned off the county road and came down the motel's access lane, and then they were in the lot, and the snow flew up from the tires in thin wings, and they cut their engines simultaneously, which was the kind of coordination that came from years of riding together. Two men. The first was built like a doorway, wide, thick through the shoulders, the kind of mass that accrued over years of labor and then refused to leave. He was wearing a leather cut that Rhett recognized with an immediacy that bypassed his conscious mind entirely and went somewhere older. The patch on the right chest. Iron Hollow. His face was 45 and had been 45 for at least a decade, deep-set eyes, a jaw that looked structural, a beard going silver that he'd stopped trimming at some point and left to make its own decisions. Cage Dillard. The second man was thinner, angular, with the coiled quality of something under tension. Early 40s, dark eyes, a scar through his left eyebrow that bisected it into two unequal parts. He dismounted the way combat veterans dismounted bikes, with the efficient absence of wasted motion, the body landing in a position of ready without performing readiness. He looked at Rhett for exactly 1 second. Royce Pruitt, Sergeant at Arms, Iron Hollow MC, looked at Rhett Maddox with the specific temperature of a man who had been waiting to be in the same parking lot for a significant amount of time. "Maddox," Cage said. "Cage." Rhett looked at him. The full look, eye contact, the acknowledgement of everything the 8 months contained. "You made good time. Left at 4. Cage's eyes moved to the truck, to Lena's window, to the badge she was still holding, and his assessment was immediate and complete. He looked back at Rhett. You want to tell me what we walked into? State AG investigator, 11 months on the network. Veal was a spotter. The primary actor has reach into county systems. Rhett delivered it the same way he'd given patrol reports. Flat, sequential, complete. The girl is still a variable they need to manage. Investigator thinks last night changed the geometry. Cage absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, without visible reaction. The information going in and getting processed somewhere the surface didn't show. Where is she? Home, presumably. Harrison has her mother's contact. We need a location. I know. Royce had not spoken. He was standing 3 feet behind Cage with his arms at his sides and his eyes on Rhett, and the quality of his attention was the quality of something that had been waiting and was now deciding whether to be patient a moment longer. Royce, Rhett said. Maddox. The word came out level and empty, a container with nothing in it. Appreciate you writing out. I wrote out for Cage. A pause, precise as a cut. We'll talk about why I'm here when the kid is safe. It was the most he could ask for, and he knew it. He looked at Cage. I need Harrison's number relayed to the investigator, and I need somebody to sit on Avery Hartwell's address while we figure out how much exposure she has. He paused. I can get the address from Harrison. I'll call him, Cage said, and pulled out his phone and moved away from the group with the efficient privacy of someone who made calls in parking lots regularly. Lena had her door open now, standing beside the truck in the early morning with her badge clipped to her jacket. Her partner, Dex, a large, quiet man in his 40s with the weathered quality of someone who'd spent years in federal work and the patience to match, was on the other side of the hood, looking at his own phone. You trust them? Lena said to Rhett, quietly, her eyes on Cage's back. With my life, Rhett said. Which I have. Twice. She absorbed this. And him? Her gaze moved to Royce. Rhett looked at the sergeant-at-arms, at the scar through his eyebrow, at the particular quality of control in his posture, the kind that wasn't natural, that had been built over something that wasn't control at all. He's here, Rhett said. That tells me what I need to know. It was not a complete answer, and Lena Strand knew it. She didn't push. Cage came back, phone in hand. Harrison confirms the Hartwell address. He's sending a unit. 20 minutes. He also says the forensics on Veal's device came back early. He paused, and the pause had weight. Maddox. There are photographs on that device. 47 of them. Another pause. Mila isn't the most recent. The cold was in Rhett's chest now, not outside it. How recent? Lena said sharply. 3 days. She turned to Dex. I need a line to the task force. Now. She moved away, her voice dropping into the rapid, precise register of someone activating a larger system. Rhett stood in the snow, with the morning light coming up hard off the white parking lot, and the sound of Lena's voice and Dex's voice and Cage's boots on the packed snow. And he thought about Mila's hands on his arm, and the 4 words in his pocket, and the 47 photographs on a predator's device. And he thought about Avery Hartwell filing a report that had been lost in a county system that had reach in it, that had been compromised, that had allowed a man to operate for long enough to take 47 photographs of children who were not yet safe. Royce was beside him. Rhett hadn't heard him move. The man had a quality of motion that was almost architectural. He was simply elsewhere and then present, without the intervening steps appearing to exist. You know what you did, Royce said, quietly, without theater, just the words. Rhett looked at him. I know what I did. 2 years ago, Keller. The name landed like something physical. Yes. You made a call. On your own. Without the chapter. Without... I know what I did, Royce. 3 of our guys got picked up in the fallout. His voice was still quiet, still precise, the same quality of control over something structural. Martinez did 14 months. A beat. His daughter was 6 when he went in. She's 8 now. He missed... He stopped. His jaw moved. He missed a lot. Rhett had nothing to say to that. It was true. All of it was true, and there was no architecture of justification that made it otherwise. I'm not here to forgive you, Royce said. I'm not going to. That's not what this is. I know. I'm here because Cage asked, and because there's a child involved, and because I am not. He paused. I am not the thing that walks away from that. His voice had a fracture in it, small and quickly controlled. Whatever else I am. Rhett looked at him. the scar through the eyebrow, the dark eyes that had something in them that wasn't hostility, that was older than hostility. That was the specific variety of pain that spent years hardening and then cracked open at the exact wrong moment. Martinez doing all right? Rhett said. Royce looked at him for 3 seconds. Better than you deserve him to be. Yes, Rhett said. A moment. We need 2 more guys for the Hartwell address, Royce said, and pulled out his phone. The chapter was moving before 8 a.m. Rhett didn't call them that. He never called them that out loud, not in front of civilians. But that was what was happening. The specific mobilization of Iron Hollow MC, 4 bikes, 2 of them new faces to Rhett, men who had heard his name connected to things he had done and things he had caused, men who were here anyway because Cage had asked, and because the situation had the particular geometry that made abstention impossible for people built the way they were built. Dangerous but not criminal. Violent in capacity but not in practice most days. Men who had come back from wars that had no formal end, that lived in the body and the sleep and the silences between normal interactions, and had found in the chapter something that approximated, imperfectly and noisily, and with considerable collateral damage, the thing they needed to continue being functional. A family. An obligation. Something larger than the individual damage. Rhett had left it. He had left it badly and had caused damage in the leaving, and he was standing in a parking lot at 6:30 in the morning receiving the consequence of that, and the consequence looked like Cage Dillard on his phone and Royce Pruitt standing 6 feet away with controlled fractures running through the control. And it felt, with the specific, complicated precision of things you did not expect to feel, like something he had not deserved and was receiving anyway. By 8:15, 2 bikes were parked on the street outside the Hartwell house, a modest rental on Alderman Street, 7 blocks from the school Mila walked home from. White siding, blue shutters, a minivan in the driveway. The chapter didn't go to the door. They didn't announce themselves. They parked on the street with the engine heat still moving off the cylinders into the cold morning air, and they sat and they watched, and anyone coming down that street with the wrong intentions would see exactly what they were looking at. Rhett drove past without stopping. He went back to Ellie's. He didn't know why exactly. Carol was there, opening up, scraping the snow from the entrance with a push broom. She looked at him with the neutral assessment she'd been applying since he first sat down at counter stool 3. Coffee, she said, please. He sat on the wobbling stool. She poured without comment. Outside, Route 47 was beginning to move. Morning traffic, trucks, the first commuters of the day carving fresh lines through the overnight snow. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee, and the particular familiarity of a place that had been doing the same thing for a long time. His phone rang. Harrison. Maddox, we have a problem. Tell me, the address we have for Veal's associate, the network contact, the person we think sent that text. I just got a flag from state records. A pause. And in the pause, Rhett could hear the specific quality of a man about to say something he didn't want to say. The address traces back to a county employee. Rhett was very still. Sheriff's Department? He said. The silence that followed answered the question before Harrison spoke. Records Division, Harrison said. 3 years with the department. A beat. She has full database access. He paused. She has access to every report that's ever been filed in this county. Everyone. Avery's report, filed 2 weeks ago. Lost in a system that had access inside it, reach inside it, a person inside it who could flag a name and run a plate and send 4 words in real time. We know who you are. Not a threat. A demonstration. Rhett put the coffee mug down very carefully on the counter. Harrison, he said, does this person know she's been flagged? Unknown. I'm trying to... Harrison. His voice was flat and very precise. Does anyone in your department know you ran this trace? A longer pause. I ran it off system. Personal laptop. State AG login that Lena Strand gave me at 4 this morning. Another beat. I don't think so. Then we have a window, Rhett said. Small one. Maddox. This is an active federal... I know what it is. I'm not asking to run the investigation. I'm asking if the window exists. A silence. Then, with the exhausted acknowledgement of a man who had been awake all night and was choosing between 2 equally terrible options. Yeah, it exists. Rhett looked at his reflection in the chrome side of the napkin dispenser on the counter. The scar. The age. The face of a man who had made a wrong call 2 years ago that had cost men he was responsible for, and who was now standing in the exact same moment again. The moment where the call had to be made, where the chapter or the law or some other structure would ordinarily bear the weight of the decision, and where the structure had compromised itself, and the weight had to land somewhere. He thought about Mila's hands on his arm. He thought about 47 photographs. He thought about a report filed and ignored, filed into a system with a person inside it, a person who had been watching for exactly this, who had been there the whole time. He thought about the whale call traveling 20 minutes through dark water, and the other whale, on the far side of the ocean, answering. "Call Lena Strand," he said to Harrison. "Conference me in. Don't tell anyone else in your department until we're all on the line." He paused. "And Harrison, the unit you sent to the Hartwell address, who did you send?" The name Harrison said was not a name Rhett knew, but the pause before he said it was the kind of pause that meant Harrison didn't know either. Not fully, not in the way you needed to know a person when the alternative was what they were currently contemplating. "Pull them back," Rhett said. "I can't just pull them back." The flatness in his voice was absolute, the total absence of anything that was not the geometric certainty of the situation as it had just resolved itself. "The chapter is on the street, Alderman Street, 2 bikes. They don't leave until we have clarity on your department." A beat. "And if you have any question about whether I'm right, go look at your records database and ask yourself who else ran a name in the last 24 hours. The silence on the line was the longest one yet. Then Harrison said, "I'll make the call." Rhett put the phone down on the counter. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the window, at Route 47 beginning its morning routine, indifferent to the geometry of what was happening in the streets running off it. He thought about the wobbling stool and the woman in scrubs who hadn't fully buttoned her coat, and the girl who asked whether the whale answered. He thought about Royce's voice. "Whatever else I am." He thought about Cage, 400 miles away at 4 in the morning, already heading for his bike. He thought about the text message and the photographs and the name in Harrison's records division and the unit on Alderman Street that Harrison didn't know well enough, and he thought about all of it together, the full connected shape of it, the way the geometry that had seemed like one man in a parking lot had resolved itself across a night into something considerably larger and considerably more deliberate and considerably closer to Mila Hartwell than anyone had understood when this started. His phone lit up. Avery Hartwell. Text message, time-stamped 60 seconds ago. "There's someone outside. Not the police. Mila is asking for you." Rhett was off the stool before he had made the conscious decision to move, jacket half-zipped, boots hitting the wooden floor of Ellie's diner with the sound of someone who had stopped waiting for permission from himself. And Carol looked up from the register and said nothing, because there was nothing in his face that invited words. And the bell above the door hit the frame for the 3rd time in less than 12 hours, as Rhett Maddox pushed through it into the hard, cold morning of Route 47, Tennessee, and went for his "I was on the road, King," before the diner door had finished swinging shut behind him. The engine caught on the first turn. That low, authoritative growl that had nothing tentative in it, the sound of something that had been built to move and knew it. And Rhett had the bike off the kickstand and pointed toward the lot exit before he'd consciously mapped the route to Alderman Street. 7 blocks. In snow. The math was already done. He pulled onto Route 47 and opened it up. The cold came in off the highway like a blade, cutting straight through the jacket, and the snow-packed asphalt gave under the tires with the specific soft resistance that demanded precision, not speed for its own sake, but controlled velocity, the kind that required your full weight and full attention and allowed nothing extraneous. He gave it both. The Road King responded with the blunt, reliable power of something that had never pretended to be elegant. His phone was in his jacket pocket. He couldn't check it. He ran the 4 blocks of Route 47, took the left onto Alderman at a lean that sent a thin spray of snow off the rear tire, and came up the street fast enough that the 2 bikes parked on the curb registered before the house did. Both still there, both riders up and facing the property, which meant they'd seen whatever Avery had texted about and were already in assessment mode. He cut the engine 30 feet from the house and coasted to the curb. The man standing on the sidewalk in front of the Hartwell property was not from the chapter. Rhett had that in the first second. Wrong posture, wrong cut, wrong everything. He was 30 or so, lean, wearing a jacket too thin for the temperature, which meant either he'd come in a hurry or he didn't plan to be outside long. He was standing on the public sidewalk, technically, hands visible, not moving toward the house. Just present. The way the man in the diner parking lot had been just present. The two chapter bikes were between him and the front door. Cage was on his feet beside his bike, arms crossed, watching the man with the specific quality of attention that communicated. I see you, and I am patient, and I have been patient in much more dangerous situations than this one. The second rider, a man Rhett didn't know, late 30s, heavy-set, a scar across his chin, was mirroring Cage's position on the other side. A wall. Not aggressive, just present. The man on the sidewalk looked at Rhett coming off his bike, and something moved in his face that he controlled quickly. Not fear, exactly, but the recalibration of someone realizing the arithmetic of the situation had changed. Rhett walked past him without stopping and went up the front path to the door and knocked twice. Avery opened it in 4 seconds. She'd been right behind it. She was still in yesterday's scrubs. She hadn't slept. And her face had the stripped quality of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for 16 hours and was beginning to understand that the adrenaline had no intention of stopping. He's been there 40 minutes, she said. Doesn't move, doesn't say anything. Just, is Mila inside? Kitchen. I told her it was a neighbor. He looked at her. She believe you? A beat. No. Lock the back door and stay in the kitchen with her. Don't open anything until I knock 3 times. He held her gaze until she nodded, and then he turned back down the path. The man on the sidewalk was watching him. Rhett stopped in front of him. Not close, 6 feet, the distance that allowed assessment in both directions. He looked at the man without the softening of performed neutrality, just the direct look. You have about 30 seconds to tell me what you're doing on this street. The man looked at him with pale eyes. Not the same pale as Veal's, not the predator's cataloging attention, but something else. Something that had weight to it. He said, I'm not with them. Rhett said nothing. Veal's network, I'm not... He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. I was. 3 years ago. I got out. He glanced at Cage, at the second rider, back at Rhett. I've been trying to get information to the AG's office for 8 months. They keep... He stopped again, and what stopped him was not composure breaking, but something more complicated. The specific stall of a man who has rehearsed a speech for a very long time and is now, in the moment, discovering that the speech doesn't cover the reality. They have someone inside the county system. I've been trying to tell someone. Nobody listens. Strand, Rhett said. Lena Strand, state AG. You tried her? Something moved across the man's face. Something that looked unmistakably like relief, and then immediately like suspicion of the relief. You know her. Since this morning. A beat. She's real? She's not, far as I can tell. Rhett looked at him steadily. Your name. A pause, then, Tanner, Cole Tanner. Cage made a small sound behind Rhett, not a word, just the briefest intake of breath. And that was enough. Rhett turned. Cage's face had changed. In all the years Rhett had known him, all the situations, all the miles, all the things they'd been through that didn't have clean names, he could count on one hand the times he'd seen Cage Dillard's face change involuntarily. It was changing now. Not dramatically. Just a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the jaw, the kind of thing that happened when a man recognized something he hadn't expected to see. Cage, Rhett said. Cage looked at him, then at Tanner, back at Rhett. Get him inside, he said. Right now. The second rider had moved to block the street view without being instructed. Rhett registered this and took Tanner's arm. Not rough, just directive. And brought him up the path and knocked 3 times on the front door. They were in Avery's living room, Mila visible through the kitchen doorway, watching them with the unashamed directness she brought to everything. When Cage closed the front door behind them and turned to face Cole Tanner with a look that was not quite rage and not quite grief, and was somehow more unsettling than either. You have a brother, Cage said. Not a question. Tanner went still. Had. Daniel Tanner, 26, found in the Cumberland River, November, 2 years ago. Cage's voice was flat and very careful, the voice of someone applying maximum control to something that required it. Ruled accidental. I wasn't drunk, Tanner said. The words came out at the exact temperature of something that had been held a very long time at the same heat. He was trying to get out, same as me. He found out about the county contact, found the name, and he told the wrong person first. A pause. They ruled it accidental. Rhett looked at Cage. You knew Daniel Tanner. He came to me, Cage said. 2 years ago. Said he had information about a network. Said he was scared. I told him. He stopped. Something moved through him that he contained, at cost. I told him to go to the sheriff's department. I told him the official channel was the right move. His eyes closed for 1 second. I didn't know about the contact inside. The room was very quiet. Mila had appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Avery was behind her with one hand on her shoulder, and neither of them said anything because something in the quality of the room's silence told them not to. Cole Tanner looked at Cage for a long moment, the look of a man deciding something. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a folded envelope and held it out. Rhett took it. Inside was a single printed page. Names. 7 of them, with county and state affiliations beside each one. The name Harrison had given Rhett, the records division employee, was 4th on the list. But it was the name at the top that did what the silence had been building toward. He looked at it. He looked at Cage. Cage had already seen it, could read it from the angle, had already absorbed it, was standing with both hands flat at his sides, in the posture of a man who has received information that reorganizes everything and is processing the reorganization at combat speed. The name at the top of the list was the name of the sheriff of Harding County, not a records clerk, not a low-level contact, the man who ran the department that Harrison worked in, the man whose system had been receiving Avery's reports, the man whose jurisdiction covered every address, every route, every file that had touched this case from the beginning. Harrison doesn't know, Rhett said. Nobody knows, Tanner said. That's the whole point. He's been running cover for the network for 3 years. Every report that came in, anything that could have broken this open, it went through his desk or his people. He paused. Your girl's report, 2 weeks ago. He saw it personally. Sent it to Veal. Avery made a sound. Small, involuntary, the sound of a physical impact arriving from an unexpected direction. Rhett did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the page. The photograph's on Veal's device, Rhett said. 47. More than that, Tanner said. Veal's device is one node. There are others. The network has been operating across 4 counties for 31 months. He paused. I know where the primary storage is. Where? Cage said. A beat. That's what I've been trying to trade for 8 months. A location, for protection. Nobody would take the trade. He looked at Rhett. Until I saw what you did yesterday, in the diner. He paused. I've been watching this case since Veal started working this county. I've been watching because I knew if Veal got picked up, the primary actor would move to sanitize. And I knew when they sent me a text this morning to come to this address and... He stopped. Rhett was already looking at him differently. They sent you here, he said, to assess the exposure, find out what the kid remembers, what she told the deputy. Tanner's voice was stripped entirely of anything except the factual. I was supposed to report back. Cage said something under his breath that wasn't a word. But you're telling us, Rhett said. I'm telling you. Tanner looked at him with the direct, exhausted attention of a man who has made a decision that cannot be reversed and knows it. Because my brother walked into a sheriff's department and trusted a chain of command that was rotten at the top, and I spent 2 years watching it happen again to other people, and He stopped. His hands at his sides were not quite still. I'm done watching. Rhett looked at the list, at the name at the top, at 6 other names he would need to cross-reference against every interaction in the last 24 hours. His phone rang. Harrison. He answered it. Maddox. Harrison's voice was tight in the way that meant something had happened. The off-system trace I ran this morning, someone flagged it. Inside the department. I don't know who yet, but the query hit a monitor and... A breath. I think I've been made. Harrison, listen to me carefully. Rhett kept his voice level. Where are you right now? My desk. Why? Get up from your desk. Do not log out. Do not take your files. Do not talk to anyone. Walk to your car the normal way you walk to your car. Drive to Ridgeline Motel, room 7. Knock 4 times. A pause. Do you understand? Silence on the line. The silence of a man whose world had just reconfigured itself around him at a velocity that precluded the normal processing time. My department, Harrison said, and the 2 words contained an entire architecture of betrayal. Everything he'd believed about the structure he worked inside. Everything he'd built his judgment on. Some of it, Rhett said. Not you. A longer silence. Move now, Rhett said. You have a narrow window. The call ended. Rhett looked at Cage. Cage looked at the list. Mila was in the kitchen doorway, watching Rhett with those undeflectable brown eyes. She had not said a word through any of it. She was 8 years old, and she had been the reason all of this had surfaced. Her 2 weeks of telling her mother's report, her run through the cold, her choice of counterstool, her hands on his arm. Every piece of it had started with her. She looked at him now and said, "Is it bad?" He looked at her for a moment. At the directness, at the specific unchildlike courage of a person who wanted the truth more than she wanted comfort. "Yes," he said. She absorbed this. "Are you going to fix it?" He looked at the list in his hand, at Cage, at Tanner standing in a stranger's living room having just burned down his last cover, at Avery behind her daughter with one hand on her shoulder, pale and steady and furious in that quiet, load-bearing way she carried everything. He thought about Daniel Tanner in the Cumberland River, about a report filed and routed deliberately to the man who ran the system it was filed in, about 31 months in 4 counties, and a network that had survived this long because the thing that should have stopped it was the thing feeding it. He thought about what Cage had said. I told him to go to the official channel. There was no official channel. Not here, not in Harding County. Every official channel ran through a desk that was compromised, every report into a system with a monitor that someone else was watching. There was only this room, these people, Tanner's list and Cage's bikes, and a deputy who was currently walking to his car, and a man Rhett had been carrying the weight of failing for 2 years, who had ridden 400 miles at 4 in the morning because a child was in danger, and Iron Hollow didn't need a clean record to understand what that required. He folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket, next to the text message. "Yes," he said to Mila. He looked at Cage. "I need Royce." Cage was already reaching for his phone when the window above the kitchen sink exploded inward in a shower of glass and cold air, and Avery pulled Mila down to the floor, and Rhett was moving before the sound had finished, crossing the living room in 3 steps, putting his body between the kitchen doorway and whatever had just come through the window came apart in one clean burst. Not a crack, not a slow fracture, but a single decisive implosion of glass and winter air that changed the physics of the room instantaneously. Rhett was already moving. 3 steps across the living room, body low, putting himself into the kitchen doorway with both arms out, creating a barrier between Mila and whatever the window had become. Behind him he heard Cage bark something, 1 syllable, sharp, and heard the second rider hit the floor, and heard Avery's voice, not screaming, just a short, hard sound like someone absorbing a blow, and heard Mila say nothing at all, which was somehow worse than any of the other sounds. The kitchen floor was covered in glass. A rock. That was all. A piece of concrete, maybe half a brick, sitting among the broken glass on the linoleum with the crude, deliberate simplicity of a message that didn't require words. Cold air was pouring through the empty frame. Snow was already coming in at the edges. Rhett looked at the window. At the angle of entry. High and to the left, thrown from the side yard, not the street. Which meant someone had moved around the perimeter of the house in the time between Rhett coming inside and now had moved through the yard without being seen by the 2 men on the street, and had gotten close enough to throw with accuracy. He turned back to the living room. Cage was at the front window. The second rider, the man with the scar across his chin, whose name Rhett still didn't know, was at the front door, hand on the knob, body angled behind the frame. Tanner had gone flat against the wall beside the fireplace, which was either instinct or training, and either answer was interesting. "How many exits?" Cage said, not turning. "Front door, kitchen back door, side door off the utility room." Rhett looked at Avery, who was on the kitchen floor with Mila against her chest, her back against the lower cabinets, both of them below the window line. Her face was white and completely controlled, the ER nurse's professional containment running over something that was not controlled at all. Basement? No. Attic access? Hallway closet, pull-down ladder. Cage turned from the window. His eyes ran the room, then settled on Rhett with the compressed communication of 20 years. 2 visible outside, at least 1 in the yard, unknown number, not spoken, understood. "They're not here to come in," Royce said. Everyone looked at him. He'd come through this front door in the last 30 seconds without announcement, the way he did everything. Present, suddenly, without the intervening steps appearing to exist. He was standing in the center of the living room with his jacket unzipped, and his dark eyes moving through the space with the rapid technical attention of a man doing geometry. "The rock is a flush," he said. "They want us looking at the yard." He looked at Rhett. "Back door, right now." Rhett went. He came through the utility room and hit the back door with his shoulder and came out into the side yard in the hard cold and found it empty. Snow untouched, except for one set of boot prints running from the property line to the window and back. One person. The prints were already filling with new snowfall, which meant they'd been made recently, but not in the last 60 seconds. He followed them to the property line. They stopped at a fence. On the other side of the fence was an alley that ran the length of the block. He looked at the alley. Empty. A dumpster 30 feet to his left. A parked car at the far end, dark, engine running. He could see the exhaust in the cold air. It was pulling away as he watched it. He stood in the snow with his hands at his sides and his breath making small clouds in front of him and watched the car disappear around the corner, and he understood with the precise clarity of someone who had spent years reading situations that the rock through the window was not aggression. It was inventory. Someone had come to confirm who was in the house, and how many, had gotten close enough to see through the kitchen window before throwing, had registered the number and composition of people inside, and had left. A report. They were sending a report. He went back inside. Royce was on his phone. Cage was in the kitchen, crouched beside Avery and Mila, speaking quietly. Not to Mila, but to Avery. And whatever he was saying had the quality of operational instruction rather than comfort, which was exactly the right instinct. Mila was watching Cage with the careful attention she brought to adults she was assessing. She had a piece of the broken glass between her fingers, just holding it, and she'd drawn a thin line of red across her thumb without appearing to notice. "You're bleeding," Rhett said. She looked at her thumb. "Oh." She set the glass down carefully on the floor. He crouched in front of her. He took her hand and looked at the cut, shallow, nothing serious, and folded her thumb into her palm. "Hold that." She did. He looked at her face. "You okay?" "I was more scared yesterday," she said. "That's reasonable." "Who threw that?" "Don't know yet." She looked at him with those eyes. "But you know what it means." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah. It means they know where we live," she said. Not a question. He didn't lie to her. "Yes." Her mouth compressed into a thin line. Something moved through her face. Not fear, not this time, but kind of anger, quiet and structural, the kind that didn't announce itself. "I hate this," she said. "I know." "I didn't do anything wrong." "No," he said. "You didn't." She looked at him for one more second, and then she nodded, once, as though she'd made a decision that was none of his business, and looked away. Royce ended his call. "2 vehicles on the north approach," he said. "Dex clocked them from the motel. They came through on Route 47, turned onto Alderman from the north end, parked 2 blocks up. Dark sedans. He's watching them." He looked at Rhett. "He also says Harrison arrived at the motel." Looked shaken. His words. Tanner had moved from the wall. He was standing near the kitchen doorway now, looking at Mila with an expression Rhett couldn't fully read. Not threatening, but layered, something complicated working behind the surface. He caught Rhett watching him and looked away. "Tanner," Rhett said. "Yeah." "The primary storage location, the one you've been trading for 8 months. He kept his voice level. "Tell me." A pause. Tanner looked at Cage. At Royce. At the broken window and the rock on the floor, and the little girl with her thumb folded in her palm. He looked at the room, and the room looked back at him, and something in the accounting of it resolved. "Old Industrial Park off County Road 9, he said. "Building 4. It's been decommissioned on paper. Water company bought it 3 years ago, never developed. But the power's running." He paused. "I've never been inside. I only know because Daniel, my brother, found the address on a device before they—" He stopped, swallowed. "Before. How many people maintain it?" "I don't know. 2 minimum. Could be more after last night." He looked at Rhett directly. "If they're pulling their assets in, moving to sanitize, they'll be there. It's the only place they can consolidate fast." Royce was already looking at Cage. Something passed between them. The same compressed chapter communication. The shorthand of men who had ridden together through situations that didn't leave room for lengthy discussion. "4 of us," Cage said. "5, Tanner said. Everyone looked at him. He looked back without flinching. "My brother," he said, simply. That was the whole argument. Cage looked at Rhett. Rhett looked at Tanner. The lean frame, the thin jacket, the pale eyes with 2 years of carried weight in them. The man who had been sent here this morning as a scout for the network, and had instead burned his last cover in a stranger's living room because he was done watching. He thought about Daniel Tanner in the Cumberland River. He thought about Ruled Accidental. You armed? Rhett said. Tanner reached into his waistband and produced a small revolver, held it grip first toward Rhett without being asked. Rhett looked at it. Old, clean, maintained. He handed it back. Keep it, he said. Royce made a sound, not quite objection, not quite agreement. The sound of a man who had strong feelings about the decision and had chosen, for now, to contain them. The vehicle's on the north end, Rhett said to him. They're not moving yet? Not yet. They're waiting for the report from whoever threw that rock. He looked at the alley side of the kitchen. When the report comes back and they know what's here, they'll move. He paused. We have maybe 20 minutes before the geometry changes and we lose the initiative completely. Harrison has the list, Cage said. He's at the motel with Strand. They can work the official end, Rhett said. The location, County Road 9. That goes to Strand directly, not through any sheriff's department channel. He looked at Cage. Strand can get a legitimate raid organized, but it takes time she doesn't have before they sanitize. A pause. We don't go there to engage. We go to document, confirm, and hold the location until she can get assets in place. That's a fine line, Royce said. I know. Last time you drew a fine line. I know, Royce. The room absorbed the silence that followed. It had a specific weight to it, the silence between two men who had unfinished business that the current situation did not have the luxury of resolving. Royce looked at him for a long moment, the scar through his eyebrow, the dark eyes, the specific fracture that ran through the control and had been running since the parking lot. Martinez's daughter, Royce said. She's 8 years old. He let that sit. Same as her. Rhett looked at Mila. She was watching him from the kitchen floor, thumb still folded in her palm, the thin line of red already drying. Avery had her arm around her. They were both watching him. I know, he said. Royce held his gaze one more second. Then he turned and walked toward the front door and said, without looking back, 5 minutes. Bikes. Cage looked at Rhett. The full look. Everything it carried. 8 months and the chapter and Keller and 2 years of distance and the 4 a.m. phone call and the snow and the parking lot and all of it, compressed into one moment of eye contact between two men who had been through enough together to communicate in the language of shared experience. You good? Cage said. Rhett zipped his jacket. No, he said. Let's go. He crouched one more time in front of Mila. She was watching him with the direct, unchildlike attention she'd been watching him with since she grabbed his leg in a diner and changed the course of an afternoon that had changed everything after it. We're going to fix it, he said. She looked at him. You said that already. Still true. She unfolded her thumb and looked at the cut. Almost stopped bleeding. She looked back at him and said, Come back. Not be careful. Not I'm scared. Just the simple, clean, 2-word instruction of someone who understood what they were asking and the full weight of what it required. He looked at her for 1 second. Then he stood and went out the front door into the cold, where 4 bikes were already running, their exhaust rising white into the winter morning, and Royce was astride his with both hands on the bars and his eyes on the road ahead. And the sound of the engines was the sound of something that had already decided and was simply waiting for the last person to catch up. Rhett walked to his Road King. He put his hand on the tank for one moment, the cold metal, the faint residual warmth of the engine, and then he swung onto it and brought it to life and felt the familiar grounding violence of the machine underneath him, and he looked at County Road 9 on the map in his head and understood with the full, unambiguous clarity of a man who has finally stopped arguing with himself that whatever happened at Building 4, there was no version of this morning in which he stayed behind. He rolled out behind Royce. The 5 of them moved down Alderman Street in the gray winter light, engines low and deliberate, the particular formation of people who had never needed to discuss how they moved together because the pattern was built into them at a level below conscious decision. And at the end of the street, Royce took the turn onto County Road 9 without a signal and without looking back, and the others followed, and the snow fell, and somewhere on the north end of Alderman, two dark sedans sat with their engines running and their occupants still waiting for a report that was never going to come back. Building 4 appeared out of the tree line, like something that had been trying to disappear for years and had almost succeeded. Low, industrial, the concrete exterior, the color of old ash. 2 vehicles in the lot, a van and a dark SUV with its rear doors open. Light in 2 windows, visible even in the gray morning. And from somewhere inside, barely audible over the idle of 5 Harley engines cutting down to nothing at the tree line, a sound that Rhett could not immediately identify. Then he identified it, and the cold in his chest became something else entirely. It was a child crying. Cage said, "There's someone inside." Royce was already off his bike, and Rhett Maddox, who had spent 2 years telling himself that the road was all he had left, and the road was enough, and the road did not require him to be anything other than a man moving through it, put his kickstand down in the snow at the edge of the tree line at Building 4 on County Road 9, and understood that the person he had been when he drove down Route 47 yesterday afternoon no longer existed, and that what replaced him was going to have to be willing to do things that person had been too broken to consider, and that this was not a choice he was making so much as a fact he was recognizing, and that there was a child crying inside that building, and he was 30 feet away in the snow. Royce moved first. Not fast. Deliberate. The way a man moves when speed is less important than silence, and silence is the only thing standing between a child inside that building, and whatever happened when the people inside understood they had company. He came off his bike and crossed the tree line in a low crouch, moving through the snow with the compressed efficiency of someone who had done this in worse conditions, with worse odds, and less reason to care about the outcome. Rhett was behind him before the thought to move had finished forming. The building was maybe 40 meters from the tree line across an open lot. Old cracked asphalt, snow-covered, a few dead weeds pushing through the brakes. No cover between the trees and the structure except the van and the SUV and the lot, and whoever was inside would have line of sight to the lot if they were watching any of the windows. The 2 lit windows were on the east-facing wall, which put them perpendicular to the approach from the tree line. Not ideal. Not impossible. Royce had already read this. He was moving toward the vehicles, using them as the cover they were, low and unhurried, and Rhett came in behind him on the right, and he could hear Cage and the others fanning out to the flanks without looking back, because looking back was not the move. The crying had stopped. That was worse. The van was unlocked. Royce checked it in 4 seconds. Cargo space, empty except for zip ties and a roll of duct tape that made the cold in Rhett's chest drop another 10 degrees, and signaled. 2 fingers, east wall. The building had a personnel door 20 feet past the van, metal-framed, industrial, the kind that latched but didn't deadbolt from the outside. Rhett could see the gap in the frame from here. Not fully closed. Someone had come out recently and come back in quickly. Royce looked at him. Rhett looked at the door, looked at the windows, looked at the 2 vehicles. The van's engine cold, the SUV's exhaust still faintly moving. He held up 2 fingers, pointed at the SUV. Someone in it recently, maybe still in it. Royce shook his head fractionally. Deal with the door first, Rhett agreed. They came up on the personnel door from the hinge side, which put the building's wall at their backs and the lot in front of them. Tanner appeared at the corner of the building from the south approach. He'd gone wide around the perimeter, and Rhett held up a fist. Tanner stopped. Held position. Cage was somewhere behind them. The other 2 riders, the man with the scar on his chin, whose name Rhett had learned in the last 20 minutes, was Briggs, and a compact, quiet man named Evers, who had ridden with Iron Hollow for 6 years and had the specific patience of someone who had been in worse rooms, had taken the north face and the west corner, respectively. Nobody had discussed this. The formation had organized itself out of the shared grammar of men who understood what buildings required. Royce put his hand flat on the door. He looked at Rhett. Rhett nodded. Royce pulled the door and went through it in one motion, and Rhett was a half step behind him, and the room they entered was a wide, low-ceilinged industrial space that smelled like cold concrete and something else, something chemical, something that did not belong. And the lights were industrial fluorescents, 2 of 4 working, casting the space in the particular flat light that made everything look the same distance away. 3 men, one by a folding table against the far wall, standing, already turning toward the sound of the door. One near a set of metal shelving units that lined the east wall, and on those shelving units, in hard drives and external storage units and stacked manila folders, was everything Rhett needed to understand that Cole Tanner had been right about what this place was and what it held. The third man was between them and a secondary door in the north wall, and he was already moving. The man by the table reached for something on the table. Royce covered the distance between them in the time it took Rhett to register the reach, and the thing on the table, a phone, not a weapon. The man was going for a phone. Went sideways as Royce got both hands on him and put him against the wall with the specific, controlled violence of someone applying exactly the force required and not 1 unit more. "Don't," Royce said. One word, absolute. The man by the shelves didn't reach for anything. He put both hands up. He was younger than the others, mid-20s, soft-faced, the particular pallor of someone who had spent a long time in rooms without windows. He looked at Rhett, and then at Royce, and then at his own hands, and appeared to be doing arithmetic that wasn't resolving in his favor. The third man had made the north door. Rhett went after him. Through the door was a short corridor, utility corridor, concrete, pipes along the ceiling, one bare bulb, and then another door that opened into what had once been a loading dock area. Cold in here, colder than the main space, and darker. The man was at the far end, heading for a roll-up door that was partially raised, the bottom edge of it about 4 feet off the ground, and he hit the floor under it without slowing and came up on the outside and kept moving. Rhett hit the floor under the roll-up door 3 seconds behind him. The outside of the building on this face was a narrow strip of cracked asphalt, and then a drainage ditch, and then scrub brush and tree line. The man was running hard, angling for the tree line, and Rhett was running harder, not because he was faster, but because the man was running from something and Rhett was running toward it, and those two velocities were different in ways that mattered. He closed the distance across the asphalt and hit the man at the edge of the drainage ditch, in a tackle that was graceless and effective, and put them both into the snow at the ditch's edge with the impact of two people who had been moving fast and had stopped being in motion. The man tried to get up. Rhett had his arm behind his back before he was halfway there. Not gentle. Not violent beyond necessity. "Stop," Rhett said. The man stopped. He was breathing in the rapid, shallow way of someone whose body had been running on adrenaline that had just been spent. Rhett could feel the shaking in him. Not cold, not entirely, but the specific full-body tremor of a person whose system had been operating at maximum intensity and had hit a wall. "Is there a child in that building?" Rhett said. Silence. The man's face was in the snow. "I'm going to ask you once more," Rhett said. His voice had the flatness of something that had burned through all its other registers and arrived at this one. "Is there a child in that building?" "Storage room," the man said, into the snow. "North of the corridor, I wasn't." Rhett was already up. "I was back under the roll-up door in 40 seconds, through the loading dock, through the utility corridor, and into the main space where Royce had the first man against the wall, and Tanner had come through the personnel door and was standing at the shelving units with his face doing something that was entirely private and entirely devastating, looking at the hard drives, at the folders, at the cataloged and organized evidence of what this place had been doing, what his brother had found, what had gotten his brother killed. And Cage was inside now too, moving through the space with his phone in his hand, photographing everything systematically and with the methodical patience of a man who understood that documentation was the only form of accountability that survived the moment. "Storage room," Rhett said to anyone. "North wall." Tanner pointed without speaking. A door Rhett hadn't clocked on first entry, painted the same gray as the wall, no handle visible from the main space. He crossed to it. It had a slide bolt on the outside, simple, the kind that cost $4 at a hardware store, and was chosen specifically because it left no evidence of what it was for. He slid the bolt. He opened the door. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10, no windows, a single bare bulb on a pull chain that was off. Cold. Not as cold as outside, but close. The cold of a space that had no heat source and had been closed for a while. In the far corner, on a piece of folded cardboard on the concrete floor, was a child. Not Mila, a boy. Maybe 9 or 10, dark hair, wearing a coat that was someone else's, too large, adult-sized, folded around him. He was looking at the door with the expression of someone who had opened their eyes so many times to the sound of a door and found the wrong thing that they had learned to not let their face do anything until they confirmed. He looked at Rhett. He looked at the cut, at the scars, at the size of the man filling the doorway. "Hey," Rhett said. Exactly as he'd said it to Mila, in exactly the same register, low, controlled, not soft, not performatively gentle, just present. My name's Rhett. I'm not with them. The boy's chest moved with one large breath. There were two of them in the room next door, the boy said. His voice was steady in the specific way that meant he'd been holding himself together for a long time by force of will and was still doing it. They were going to move me tonight. Nobody's moving you, Rhett said. Can you stand? Yeah. He stood carefully, the too large coat hanging off him. He looked at the door, at the main space beyond it, at Tanner, who had come to stand behind Rhett. He looked at Tanner for a moment longer than everything else. Tanner was looking back. Something moved through Tanner's face that he didn't control, that came from somewhere deeper than control could reach. You know him, Rhett said. Tanner's jaw worked. His mother filed a report 14 months ago, he said. His voice was very careful. It was one of the first reports I found in the county database, one of the first ones that had been intercepted. He stopped. I've been trying to find him for 8 months. The boy looked at Tanner. Do you know where my mom is? Tanner looked at Rhett, and the look was not something Rhett had seen on his face before. It was not the controlled, weight-carrying look of a man who had been managing grief for years. It was the look of a man standing on the far side of an action that had taken everything he had to take, and finding that on the far side of it, the thing he'd been hoping for was real. Yeah, Tanner said to the boy. I'm going to find her. Rhett stepped back from the doorway and let the boy out. His phone buzzed. Lena Strand. We have assets 12 minutes out, she said when he answered. Harrison gave us everything. We have a warrant for the building, and we have the sheriff detained. He made a run at 6:50 this morning, took his personal vehicle north, and a state trooper friend of Dex's ran him down on 40 before he made the county line. A pause. And in the pause, the specific quality of someone who has been running on caffeine and adrenaline for 16 hours and has just confirmed the thing they've been chasing for 11 months. Maddox, is there evidence at the location? Yes. He looked at Cage, still photographing systematically, at the shelving units, at the hard drives. Substantial. Don't touch anything. I mean it. Not one. Cage is documenting. Nothing's been moved. He paused. Strand. There's a child. Male, approximately 10. He's been here overnight minimum. A sound on the line. Is he physically okay? Scared. He needs people who know how to do this. 12 minutes, she said. There will be a victim advocate with the team. Keep him warm, and don't let anyone else in that building. A pause. And Maddox. Her voice dropped a register. The man who runs this network. His name is Gerald Howell. The sheriff was his cousin. They built this together over 5 years. She paused. We think Howell was at the building this morning and moved when he got the scout's report from Alderman Street. He may still be in the county. Rhett looked at the empty lot through the personnel door. At the SUV with its rear doors still open. The SUV in the lot, he said. Rear doors were open when we arrived. Someone loaded it fast. He's running, Lena said. Cage. Rhett turned. Cage looked up from his phone. The SUV. Plates. Cage was outside in 15 seconds. Back in 30. He read the plate to Rhett, who read it to Strand, who was already talking to someone else before he'd finished the last digit. In the main space, Royce had the man from the table zip-tied to the table leg itself with the zip ties from the van, which had a particular efficiency that Rhett chose not to examine. The soft-faced young man was sitting on the floor with his back against the shelving units, hands zip-tied in front of him, looking at the floor. Briggs was on the south exterior and Evers on the north, watching the approaches. Tanner had taken the boy to the corner of the room farthest from the shelving units and was sitting on the floor with him, cross-legged, talking quietly. Rhett watched them for a moment. The angular, worn-down man in the thin jacket and the boy in the too large coat sitting on the concrete floor of a building that had held the worst of what adults could do, talking in the low, unhurried way of two people who had both been waiting for a long time and had found the end of the wait here, of all places, on a winter morning in County Road 9. Royce appeared at Rhett's shoulder. They stood side by side in the flat fluorescent light for a moment without speaking. Outside, distantly, Rhett could hear the wind moving through the tree line. The building ticked and settled in the cold. You know he's still out there, Royce said. Yes. 12 minutes. Strand gets her people in here. This becomes a federal operation, and we are officially not present at a location where 2 men are zip-tied. He paused. 11 minutes now. I know. The SUV plates traced to a vehicle registered to Howell. He loaded it and ran when the scout reported back. He knows the location is blown. Another pause. He knows who blew it. Rhett looked at the personnel door, at the snow visible through it, at his road king at the tree line, patient and cold. He has a 12-minute head start in a county he's run for 5 years, Royce said. He knows every road, every route. He paused. Official channels already had one shot at him, and that was his cousin. Rhett looked at him. Royce looked back. The dark eyes. The scar through the eyebrow. The face of a man who had ridden 400 miles before dawn because a child was in danger, who had zip-tied a man to a table leg without ceremony or cruelty, who had said, "I am not the thing that walks away from that," in a living room on Alderman Street, and had meant every syllable. "I need to know something," Rhett said. "What?" 2 years ago, Keller. "If you'd been there, if I'd called you instead of going alone, what would you have done?" Royce was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a man choosing the true answer over the easy one. "Same thing you did," he said. "And I would have called the chapter first, and we would have done it together, and Martinez wouldn't have been standing in the lot when the police arrived." He paused. "That's the difference." "Yes," Rhett said. "So call the chapter," Royce said. Rhett looked at the tree line, at the 5 bikes in the snow, at the road beyond it that ran east toward Route 47, north toward the county line, everywhere and nowhere, the same road he'd been living on for 2 years because it was the only thing he trusted not to cost someone else something. His phone buzzed. Harrison. Text message. SUV tracked on highway camera, Route 47 northbound. 20 minutes ago, he's heading for the state line. Rhett showed it to Royce. Royce read it, looked at Rhett. 10 minutes before Strand's people get here, he said. We leave now. We're ghosts before the warrant team arrives. Clean. He paused. Or we stay, give statements, and Howell makes the state line in a vehicle that state police will eventually find abandoned somewhere in Kentucky. He won't stop, Rhett said. Not with what he's built. He'll rebuild somewhere else. I know. Another county, another system, another 5 years. I know. The boy in the corner laughed at something Tanner had said. A small, exhausted, genuine laugh, the sound of someone discovering that they still had that capacity. And the sound of it moved through the concrete space and hit every surface and came back changed. Rhett zipped his jacket. He crossed to the corner and crouched in front of the boy. The boy looked at him with the same direct assessment he'd used from the doorway. Processing, categorizing, deciding. People are coming to help you, Rhett said. About 10 minutes. There will be a woman named Lena. She's good. You can trust her. He paused. Tanner's going to stay with you until they get here. The boy looked at Tanner. Tanner nodded. The boy looked back at Rhett. He looked at the cut, at the scar, at the face of a man who looked like danger and had opened a door. He said, Are you going to get the other one? Rhett held his gaze. Yes. Okay, the boy said. Simple, sufficient. Rhett stood. He looked at Cage. Cage was already pocketing his phone, already moving toward the personnel door, already in the grammar of departure, the compressed efficiency of men who understood that the window was specific and was closing. Briggs and Evers materialized from the exterior positions. Nobody spoke. Royce was already outside. Rhett walked through the personnel door into the cold morning and across the snow to his Road King and swung onto it and felt the engine come alive under him with the low, authoritative voice of something that had been waiting. Around him, 4 other engines woke up in quick succession, and the sound of them together in the winter air was not a threat and not a performance. It was simply the sound of 5 men who had decided, and decisions at this velocity didn't require any other sound. He looked at Route 47 north on the map in his head. He thought about Mila's hands on his arm. He thought about a boy in a too large coat on a concrete floor. He thought about Daniel Tanner in the Cumberland River and 47 photographs in 31 months and a system that had been rotten at the top since before any of this started. He thought about Royce's voice. Same thing you did. And I would have called the chapter first. He looked at Cage beside him, at Royce on his left, at Briggs and Evers flanking, and for the first time in 2 years the formation felt like what it was. Not a thing he'd walked away from, not a weight he'd been carrying the shape of, but the actual thing itself, present and real and moving. He rolled forward and the others came with him, and the 5 bikes moved out of the building 4 lot and onto County Road 9 and turned north, engines climbing as they hit the open road, the sound of them rising into the gray Tennessee morning, like something that had been a long time coming and had decided it was done. Waiting, and the snow flew up from the tires in thin white wings, and the tree line blurred on either side, and Route 47 came up ahead with its northbound lane open and cold and long, and somewhere on it, 20 minutes ahead in a dark SUV loaded with the wreckage of 5 years of deliberate harm, Gerald Howell was running toward a state line he was not going to. They found the SUV 11 miles north of the county line. Not abandoned, not crashed, pulled to the shoulder of Route 47 with its hazard lights running, both front doors open, engine still going. The kind of stop that happened when something went wrong fast, and the person driving didn't have the luxury of choosing the location. Rhett came off the throttle, and the Road King dropped from highway speed to a crawl in the space of 30 yards. And the others fanned out behind him in the formation they'd been holding for 11 miles. Royce to his left, Cage to his right, Briggs and Evers covering the flanks, 5 bikes dropping to idle at the shoulder of a highway that was empty in both directions in the gray early morning. Gerald Howell was standing in the breakdown lane between the open driver's door and the concrete barrier. I was 62 years old. Rhett hadn't known that until Lena had texted it along with the photo an hour ago. And the age surprised him because the man looked older. Not in the way of someone worn down by hard living, but in the way of someone whose face had learned to perform authority for so long that the performance had become the texture of the skin itself. Silver hair, heavy in the shoulders, the kind of frame that had once been impressive and was now simply large. He was holding a phone in one hand and nothing in the other. His SUV had a blown rear tire. The rim was sitting on the asphalt, the rubber shredded back along the last quarter mile. He'd driven it flat for as long as it held and then pulled over. And now he was standing on Route 47 in the winter morning, looking at 5 bikers who had appeared behind him like something the highway had manufactured for the specific purpose of this moment. Nobody moved. Rhett let the Road King idle for 5 seconds, then shut it down. In the silence that followed, the sudden total silence of 5 engines going quiet simultaneously, the wind off the highway was the only sound, and it was considerable. The particular cold intelligence of a Tennessee winter morning that had decided to be present for this. Rhett got off the bike. He walked toward Howell. He stopped 8 feet away and looked at the man with the same direct, unadorned attention he'd been using since yesterday afternoon. Not performed, not hostile, just the complete and unambiguous look of someone who was done with intermediary distances. Howell looked back. His face did several things in rapid succession: assessment, calculation, the rapid inventory of options, and arrived at a stillness that had the quality of something decided. He looked at the cut, at the scars, at the 5 men arranged behind Rhett on the highway shoulder with the patient, immovable quality of things that had been there a long time and would be there longer. "You're not law enforcement," Howell said. "No," Rhett said. "Then you can't—" "I'm not here to arrest you," Rhett said. Something shifted in Howell's face. "Then what?" "I'm here so you understand," Rhett said, "that it's over. Every drive, every file, every name on every list. Strand has the building. She has the storage. She has your cousin in a state trooper's vehicle on 40, and she has 2 of your people zip-tied to a table." He paused. "And she has a boy who was in that storage room overnight, who is sitting with a victim advocate right now telling her everything he remembers." Howell's jaw tightened. The calculation in his eyes was still running, still looking for the angle, still working the geometry, and that was the thing about men who had operated inside corrupted systems for long enough. They never fully believed the system had stopped working for them, not even when the evidence was standing 8 feet away in a leather cut on a highway shoulder. "You have nothing to do with this legally," Howell said. "Anything you—" "I know," Rhett said. "I'm not collecting evidence. I'm not testifying." He held the man's gaze. "I'm telling you it's done so that when Strand's people arrive in—" He checked nothing. He'd been tracking the time. "About 4 minutes. You don't make a decision that makes this worse for you than it already is." Howell looked at him for a long moment. At the road behind Rhett, empty and white. At the highway stretching north toward a state line he was not going to reach on a blown rim. At the phone in his own hand, which had been going to make a call that Rhett suspected now would not be answered because the person it was going to hadn't answered in the last 40 minutes because that person was in custody. The phone went into his pocket. Something left Howell's face when he did that. Not remorse. Rhett did not mistake it for remorse. Did not allow himself the comfortable fiction of that. It was the specific deflation of a man whose operational certainty had been running so long that its absence felt structural, felt like a physical thing being removed from the body. What was left without it was just a 62-year-old man on a highway shoulder in the cold. "There's a boy," Rhett said. Quiet. 9 years old. He's been in that building since Thursday. Howell said nothing. His mother filed a report 14 months ago. Rhett's voice did not change register. "It came across your desk." The silence that followed was the loudest thing on Route 47. Rhett turned and walked back to his bike. Lena Strand's vehicles came over the hill from the south 2 minutes later. 2 state vehicles, no sirens, moving fast. They pulled in behind the bikers on the shoulder, and Lena got out of the first one with the compressed energy of someone who had been awake for 24 hours and had decided that sleep was a problem for a different version of herself. She looked at Howell. She looked at Rhett. "He's standing," she said. "Yes," Rhett said. She looked at him for a moment with the specific attention of a woman who had spent 11 months on a case that had been stalled, obstructed, and run into walls that she now understood had been built deliberately by the man currently standing between his own open car doors. "You didn't—" "No," he said. She held his gaze one more second, and then she walked past him toward Howell with her badge out and the particular forward momentum of someone who had been waiting a long time to take this exact number of steps. Rhett stood at his bike and watched it happen and felt, not satisfaction, not relief, not the clean resolution that movies promised was waiting on the far side of things like this. He felt the specific, complicated weight of an accounting that was accurate but incomplete. A boy in a storage room. 47 photographs. 31 months. Daniel Tanner in the Cumberland River. All of it real. All of it documented now. All of it in the hands of people whose job it was to carry it forward. It was not enough. It was what existed. He put his hand on the Road King's tank and felt the cold metal and thought about Mila on the counter stool with her thumb folded in her palm, asking him to come back. Cage appeared beside him. They stood together watching Lena put Howell in the back of the state vehicle with the systematic efficiency of 11 months arriving at their conclusion. "Martinez," Rhett said. "Yeah," Cage said. "I want to call him." A pause. "I know. Not to—" Rhett stopped, started again. "Not to explain. There's nothing I can say that changes what happened." He looked at the highway, at the bare trees, at the sky going from gray to the particular pale gold of a winter sun, deciding to try. "I just want him to know I know what it cost." Cage was quiet for a moment. "He knows," he said. "He's known for 2 years." A pause. "That doesn't mean don't call." Royce came up on Rhett's other side. The three of them stood in a row at the highway shoulder in the cold, watching the state vehicles, and the silence between them had a different quality than any silence they'd shared in the last 12 hours. Not the silence of unresolved things. The silence of things that were resolved imperfectly and completely, which was the only way things ever resolved, and which required a different relationship with silence than the one Rhett had been maintaining for 2 years. "You staying in the county?" Royce said. "For a while," Rhett said. Royce absorbed this. "Chapter's got a contact in Harding. Small operation. 2 guys. Good people." A pause. "If you needed a place to work out of." Rhett looked at him. At the scar through the eyebrow. At the face of a man who had said, "I'm not here to forgive you," and had meant it, and was standing here anyway, which was its own kind of statement about what forgiveness was worth compared to what presence cost and what presence meant. "I'll think about it," Rhett said. "That's all I'm asking," Royce said. They rode back south as the morning sun came fully over the hills and turned the snow along Route 47 into something briefly luminous, the light off it sharp and clean, the kind of light that arrived after hard weather and made everything look like it had been recently decided. 5 bikes in formation, unhurried now, the velocity of people who had somewhere to be rather than somewhere to flee, and the difference in those 2 velocities was the difference between the last 2 years and this morning, and Rhett felt it in his hands on the bars and in his chest and in the specific quality of the road under him, which was the same road it had always been and was somehow not. He pulled into Ellie's parking lot at 8:47. Carol was behind the counter when he walked in. She looked at him, the full assessment, head to boots, and poured a coffee without being asked and set it at counter stool 3. He sat down. The stool wobbled. He put both hands around the mug and let the heat move through his palms and looked at the window, at Route 47 in the morning light, at the ordinary ongoing business of a highway that had yesterday been the backdrop of something extraordinary and was today simply a road. His phone buzzed. Avery Hartwell. Text message. "We're at the diner," Mila asked. "Is that okay?" He looked at the message. He looked at the door. It opened before he could respond. The bell above it making its ordinary sound, which he had now heard enough times that it had become specific, had become associated with a particular quality of arrival. And Mila came in first, lavender coat repinned where the button was missing, her hair pulled back, her eyes moving through the room in the rapid assessment she brought everywhere, and landing on him with the directness of someone who had been looking for a specific thing and found it. She walked to counter stool 2. She climbed up. She looked at him. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. She considered this. "People say things," she said. The statement of someone who had learned this at an age when the learning left marks. "Yes," he said. "They do." She looked at him for a moment with those brown eyes that had seen more than they should have and had not looked away from any of it. Then she reached into her backpack and produced a folded piece of paper and set it on the counter beside his coffee mug. He unfolded it, a drawing. Blue crayon and pencil, the colors slightly outside the lines in the way of someone drawing fast, drawing from something real rather than something composed. A diner, a counter. 2 figures, one large, one small. The large one had a leather jacket rendered with careful attention to detail, each stitch marked. The small one had a lavender coat. Between them on the counter, a mug. Above them, through the window she'd drawn, a highway and a motorcycle, and in the sky, in careful childish letters, the whale called back. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "You can keep it," she said, as though this were obvious. Avery sat on the stool on his other side. She was in regular clothes today, jeans, a green sweater, her hair down, the ER nurse's compressed efficiency replaced by something quieter and more exhausted and more real. She had 2 shadows under her eyes that would take days to disappear, and she didn't appear to be concerned about them. "The boy," she said. "From the building. Lena called me." A pause. "His mother is coming. She's been looking for him since November." "I know," he said. Tanner stayed with him until she arrived. She looked at her coffee. He's not what I expected him to be." "No," Rhett said. "He isn't." Avery looked at him. "What happens now? With the case?" "With Strand runs it," he said. "She's been building it for 11 months. She knows what it needs." He paused. "It'll take time. The right things usually do." She nodded slowly. "And Harrison?" "Harrison's a good deputy who worked inside a bad system and didn't know it. That's different from the other thing." He picked up his mug. "He'll be all right." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're staying?" Not a question. He looked at her. The green sweater, the shadows under her eyes, the woman who had filed a report that had been weaponized against her daughter and had held herself together with the specific load-bearing composure of someone who did not have the option of collapse. And he felt the familiar instinct to qualify, to hedge, to leave himself a route back to the road and the distance and the forward motion that asked nothing of him. He looked at Mila's drawing. The whale called back. "For a while," he said. Avery looked at him for a moment and then looked at her coffee, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile and was better than one. "That's enough," she said. Mila had taken a pencil from her backpack and was adding something to a second piece of paper on the counter, drawing with the focused, private concentration of a child who has found the activity that requires everything and asks nothing back. She was drawing a motorcycle. 5 motorcycles. They were outside a diner that had 2 windows and a sign above the door, and in the parking lot they were arranged in a loose formation that looked, even in blue crayon, like something that had chosen to be there. Cage came in at 9:15, then Briggs, then Evers. They filled the stools along the counter without ceremony, without announcement. Carol poured coffee along the row without being asked, the way she did for people who had been there before and would be there again. Royce came in last, sat at the end, put both hands around a mug, and said nothing. And the nothing was the most comfortable silence Rhett had sat in for 2 years. Outside, Route 47 moved through its morning. Trucks. Commuters. The ordinary ongoing passage of people who had places they were going and people they were going to, the vast anonymous machinery of ordinary life running its ordinary course through a Tennessee winter that had decided, finally, to ease. The snow along the shoulder was melting at the edges. The sky was pale blue and very clear, the particular clarity that arrived after something had passed and left the air clean behind it. Rhett Maddox sat on the wobbling stool at Ellie's Diner on Route 47 with black coffee in his hands and a drawing beside him and a girl on his left, drawing motorcycles and a woman on his right who had stopped being a stranger somewhere in the last 24 hours, and he did not feel the road the way he usually felt it. The pull of it, the particular gravity of forward motion and open distance, and the relief of belonging to nothing and no one. He felt the stool wobble under him. He felt the heat of the mug in his hands. He felt Mila's elbow bump his arm as she worked on her drawing, the small, unconscious contact of someone who did not need to announce their proximity, who had simply decided that his space and her space were, for the time being, the same space, and that this required no discussion. He looked down at the drawing she'd given him, at the careful stitching on the leather jacket, at the two figures at the counter, at the highway through the window, at the motorcycle in the parking lot, and the 5 words written in the sky above it. He thought about 20 minutes of silence in the dark water, and the answer that came back anyway. He put the drawing carefully in the inside pocket of his cut, against his chest, where it would stay. Outside, the last of the morning frost was burning off the asphalt of Route 47, and somewhere down the highway, Rhett Maddox's road. King sat in the parking lot of Ellie's Diner with its engine cold and its kickstand down, pointing at no particular direction, belonging for the first time in 2 years to somewhere rather than nowhere, and the neon sign above the diner door glowed its ordinary colors into the pale winter morning, and the bell above the door was still, and inside a man who had spent 2 years proving to himself that he had nothing left worth staying for sat on a wobbling stool and did not move. And for the first time in a very long time, not moving was exactly enough.